I've known Gurpreet Singh Ji for a little over a year now, and it's been a pleasure to know him. I first met him when we were putting up a plaque to recognize the first Sikh temple in North America on 2nd Avenue in Burrard in Vancouver, and Gurpreet Ji was a great help for that. And over that time period, I've learned about his work. His book is important for many reasons, and I can speak, if I may, as a historian, as a museum worker, as a curator. The archive that we work from is racist. The archive that we work from is colonialist. It has biases. And the important thing about Gurpreet Singh's work is that it reframes that dialogue. When the city of Vancouver's archives are based upon H.H. Stevens, the man who tried to actively keep out Indians from Canada and from Vancouver, Gurpreet Singh Ji's work reframes it and shows a South Asian perspective on that story. For that reason, it's important. At the same time, too, his work shows that when we look at the history through the lens of the South Asian community, new voices appear, new stories can be told that help tell the story of not only political activism, but intercultural dialogue, and how those have progressed through time to today. And of course, specifically also, how the history that goes back to 1914, when Mewa Singh shot Hopkinson, how that history and those stories and those themes still have relevance until today. But first off, though, I want to introduce Cecilia Point to come up and say a few words.
Before the event starts, my sister reminded us we need to do a Musqueam welcome. So, Enta Cecilia Point, Talitza Natla Homasqueam. My name is Cecilia Point. I'm from Musqueam. My family has lived in this area, the Lower Mainland, for thousands of years. And my sister Mary and I are here today, and we will do a welcome song, and I'll speak later about colonialism. But I just want to really welcome you all to Musqueam. We'll see him.
Thank you so much. And we want to remind everyone as well that this is unceded Musqueam territory that we are currently on. So thank you for allowing us to be here today. I actually will say that we have Mary and Cecilia Point speaking today. We also have Kimball Kiriu speaking as well too from the People's Voice. Charlie Smith, of course, from the Georgia Strait, and former BC Human Rights Commissioner Hinder Mahil, who is speaking as well too. Before we have the book launch later on this afternoon, and I hope all of you had a chance to go see Janelle Singh Ji's exhibition of the Kama Garden Room in the room at the side. If you haven't had a chance yet, Janelle Singh Ji is here to show you around. Let us begin first, though, with opening the event by traditional song by the Musqueam tribe members and prominent Indigenous activists Cecilia Point and Mary Point.
Ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, my name is Mary Point. I'm from the Musqueam Nation, and this is my sister Cecilia Point. In our community, long before colonialism, whenever anyone arrived into our area, our people would ride out in the canoes and greet the visitors. And this happened for everyone, including the explorers and the colonials. So I'd like to sing a song today. I mentioned to one of the ladies earlier, it's a favorite of mine. She mentioned Chief Dan George. He's a cousin of ours from the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. And I saw him singing this just randomly in the Little Big Man movie, and he was just standing by a tree singing it, and I thought, oh, we know that song. So this song is an honor song. It's sung for people who are not of the mask. In our culture, we have long houses and we wear traditional masks in our cultural ceremonies, but this is a song of welcome to honor everyone who is not of the mask. And it's also a song that the families would sing as the husbands would go out for fishing, and when the husbands would come back, they would start singing it on the river, and the family would know they were coming. So it's called the Heartbeat of Chehalis, which is a little bit up the river from us, but it's a lovely song. And so. Gurpreet mentioned was the struggle for us continues on a regular basis in our unceded territory. And there are many atrocities on an ongoing basis for us, just as there have been for you. And so there is a song that is in our language. It's thousands of years old. It's from a part of a place on the river called the Mali. And it's a story of a young girl who used to hunt with her brothers. And the brothers would always use her to beat the bushes to get the deer to come out. And when she got older, she said, hey, maybe I can hunt now too, because I'm older. And they just laughed at her and said, no, you have one job, that's it, don't be getting any ideas, we're gonna keep you contained. So she ran off into the woods, and she came across some wolves, and she transformed into a wolf. And in our culture, we believe that we can commune with the animals. So for her, she transformed into a wolf, and she became much more powerful and much stronger. And so her brothers happened to see her transform, and they said, this wolf thing could be useful to us, so maybe you can come back. And she said, no, I know who I am, I know where I belong, I know what is right, and I'm going to stay as a wolf. So for me, it's a song about empowerment. And because our language is lost, I should say, even now when some of our drummers or singers receive a song, they can't always use all of the words because our language was almost eradicated by colonialism. But this is one song that has been kept for thousands of years. It's in news to
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for those wonderful songs, and for sharing with us your history and your passion. Thank you so much. I'd like to call upon the stage Cecilia Point, who will be providing us a lecture on the history of occupation and Indigenous struggles against colonization in Canada and the relevance of the ongoing grassroots level Idle No More movement. Cecilia.
Hi, Chika. Not sure if I'll need my glasses. Yes, I will. Okay. I'm a little nervous. Gurpreet asked me to give a lecture, and I'm usually one of those people that just yells at rallies, so I'm going to do my best. Yeah, as I stated, we've lived here for thousands of years. My great-grandfather, James Point, lived to be over 100 years old. So he had a lot of history to tell us, and as you may know, we have always kept an oral history, our stories, our songs, and he was the one that brought to the attention of our community an old village site, which was thousands of years old. There was an archaeology dig there in the early 1900s where they discovered hundreds of bodies and artifacts that were over 4,000 years old. So it was declared a National Historic Site, and I will talk about that again later. My great-grandfather's traditional name was Manat, and which meant great leader or strong man. When the what used to be called the Indian agent from Indian Affairs came to tell us we needed a name, a last name, he said, my people have lived on this point for thousands of years, so our last name will be Point. So he was the first Point. And my grandmother was from the Squamish Nation, and her father was actually, my great-grandfather on that side was actually from Chile. And the Chilean boats used to come up, and the men made babies with the Squamish women, so there's lots of Chilean people on the Squamish side as well. So his name was Manuel Cortez. And my mother was Irish, and that's me. Colonization, that's a long topic. I'll try to wrap it up in 5 minutes, but before contact, this land now known as British Columbia was the most populated place in North America. We lived here in a mild climate with lush vegetation, abundant food sources in the oceans, and the berries and the plants and the rivers and streams. Even in this smaller region of the Lower Mainland, hundreds of villages existed, which can now be traced back through DNA sampling. There was an article about a month ago where a woman was traced back to her 5,500-year-old relative. So our oral history also evidences, you know, our ancestors and occurrences that used to take place, like tsunamis and earthquakes. It's all in our oral history, and it's verified with scientific data as well. So up until about 1778, our ancestors lived blissfully unaware that drastic changes were taking place in Eastern Canada since the 1500s, 1600s. And traders began to appear, and that's traders, T-R-A-D-E-R-S for now, began to appear out from the water off of Vancouver Island, and trading began. And it was, you know, not too bad for us. We were trading our furs and getting new weapons and tools to work with. The Royal Proclamation had taken place in Eastern Canada at 1763 under the British Crown. The proclamation declared that only the Crown could acquire land from First Nations, and only by treaty. So that wasn't always happening in British Columbia. In 1871, British Columbia joined Canada, and that's when a lot of problems started. In 1871, when BC joined Confederation, it was the only province whose Indigenous population outnumbered the settlers. And then rapidly, by 1911, only 8% of the populace was Indigenous. And as you know, there was, you know, not only there were actual slaughters, but there were new diseases like smallpox and influenza, which we were not ready for. So the Canadian Constitution stated that First Nations people were to continue access to their traditional territories so they could hunt and fish and gather. However, settlers were given free access to property. They would just arrive and they were given land. Native peoples started to be placed on reserves. Then the reserves began to get taken away as well. There is a recent story in one of the local independent papers which talks about the demise of the Catsalano Reserve, which was, you know, designated. Native people were to live there, and then the city of Vancouver said, no, that land is too valuable, let's move them. So again, we were moved, put on a barge, and sent over to North Vancouver. So the other thing that happened was colonial governments brought in opposing rules for hunting. A few years ago, I did a project in school on the James Bay Cree and the hydroelectric dam that was going to come in there and wipe out all of their hunting territory. Native people used to go hunting in the winter time because it was easy to catch large game like moose. They would get stuck in the snow and they could catch them quite easily. However, when the colonizers came over, they wanted to hunt in the milder climate, so they made it illegal to hunt in the winter time. And if that wasn't bad enough, if they caught a native person fishing or hunting in the winter, of course they would arrest them, and they would also just destroy the food. No one could have it, so it was ridiculous. The food didn't even get to go back to the village. So there was all kinds of ridiculous laws like that taking place. And of course, years later, there's massive resource development projects happening, like the oil sands and mines, and now the food is actually poison. So another killer began to infiltrate Native people, and that was cancer. Of course, the late 1800s brought residential schools. 1920, the Indian Act stated that Native people must attend residential school. 150,000 people have gone through residential schools, and we've now learned about the atrocities that have happened there. My father went to residential school. Atrocities happened to him. I won't go into detail, but it was horrible. And now we're learning about scientific experiments, drug trials on children. And if children died in residential school, they did not send them back to their families because there was too big of a cost. So they would just bury them in unmarked graves. Terrors from these schools continued to reveal themselves, from unspeakable abuses to medical experiments. Reserves. All of the land set aside for Aboriginal peoples, or reserves, in Canada would fit onto Vancouver Island. So the first offensive was moving us off of our vast lands and onto these strange, unfamiliar places. And over time, people were moved a lot. The Oka crisis was a result of a culmination of these removals. When Jesuit priests arrived there in the land called Montreal, currently called Montreal, they chose a valuable piece of real estate and moved the natives away from there. And then they moved them several times. And then in one instance, they said, oh, there's a nicer piece of land on the prairies, and they asked a whole lot of the Oka inhabitants if they wanted to move to the prairies, and they loaded them all up on wagons and dropped them in the middle of the prairies in Manitoba with nothing. No supplies, no food, so most of them perished there. So stories abound of established communities removed from one place to another in military cargo planes, barges, truck convoys, for no other reason than the establishment either wanted the property for another use or made promises to corporations or resource companies that they could have it. I want to point out this doesn't happen to other groups of Canadians. Further to this, the Indian Act prevented Native people from taking legal action, as was discovered by the group of Nisga'a. By the time colonialism rolled out to British Columbia and the Nisga'a were told, you know, we want to move you onto reserves and take your land, they said, no, we don't like the sound of that. And so a group of them actually got together and traveled to England to meet with the Queen and object to what was happening. But of course they were sent back, and it was illegal for Native people to hire a lawyer. So they continued to fight, and it took them 100 years to get the Nisga'a Treaty. I'll talk briefly about water, education, and taxes. And people think that Native people don't pay taxes. Well, I live in Richmond, and I pay taxes, and I own a home, and I contribute. So even if people live on reserves, they do pay taxes. If you purchase anything that is not on that little small postage stamp size of a reserve, you go to a Richmond Center or Oak Ridge or wherever, buy your gas, you have to pay taxes on it. That's just how it is. So Native people are not exempt from that. There are tiny little areas where they are, but they have to be on a reserve. And likewise with income. We do pay income tax unless you are one of the tiny few that works on a reserve. You do not pay taxes on that income. But if you work off reserve, like most people do, you do pay taxes on your income. So when we talk about, you know, people talk about all the money that goes to Native people, that's our money. We paid that money, we paid taxes. And money also goes to municipalities and provinces and all other projects and corporations. So I'm not really sure why people have such an issue, and it is the way that government paints us. I mean, it is a top-down message, so they're making us look like we're lazy. But of course, they've moved us around, and of course, I've talked about taking, you know, our livelihood away with the fishing and hunting that is now destroyed. So, and it was agreed to, I heard my sister telling someone earlier, it was agreed to in settlement with the proclamation, with the Constitution, that because of the trade for our land, the things that we were giving up, it's mandated that we are to get education, water, municipal services, and with the federal government controlling that, it does not always work out as well. Now, for us living close to major centers, we don't suffer as much as those in the northern reserves. I'm sure you saw the situation in Attawapiskat where people did not even have water running into their homes. They had to carry buckets. You know what? This is Canada. Does this happen in Prince George? No, it doesn't. It happens on reserves. Likewise with the education, a lot of reserves don't have schools. And that just doesn't happen in other municipalities. So I just really want people to know that. I talked earlier to Gurpreet this week about police brutality and murdered and missing women. My friend Beverly Jacobs was the former chair of the Native Women's Association of Canada, and she said that the violence against women started with colonialism, because our women used to be decision makers and sit at the table, and it's only the colonial way of thinking where the women don't have any power and don't have rights and don't inherit and so on. So that's not the way that we used to make our decisions. So Grand Chief Stuart Phillip of BC has stated that not only does police brutality concern him, but the fact that policing establishments in Canada have neglected Native women, neglected their disappearances and their murders going unsolved. I mean, I'm sure you heard, it's not comfortable to talk about, but there was a white woman who went missing about a month ago. And I mean, her face was on the news 24 hours a day, oh, she left her children at home, where is this woman? We can't find her. It's very unusual for her to be disappeared. And the next day, she was at her bank machine. So I don't know where she went, but I mean, they found her. I don't know what happened there. But I mean, geez, when a Native woman goes missing, you sure don't see that sort of coverage. And the police brutality incidents are now investigated by other police agencies. So there was an incident in northern BC in April where a Native man was beaten so badly in police custody that he is now disabled. So there was an investigation, and the New Westminster Police investigated and said, yes, indeed, there should be charges brought against the officers who did this to him. But then the Crown overturned the decision. So these are top-down things that are coming down the pike. The resistance of Indigenous people. So our people have stood up and taken to the streets and conducted roadblocks, and people look out, what are they doing? I mean, so now you're kind of getting a little taste of all the things that we're putting up with. And, there was no war. We were not conquered. Every time we threaten that we are going to, start a war, like with the Nishka, the government came back and said, oh no, don't worry, we'll work this out. Don't worry, we're working on it. We keep going to court, and actually when we go to court, we usually win. But the Crown fights us and appeals what is written in the proclamation and the Constitution. The Oka crisis. The situation again was a piece of property that was borrowed from the band with the agreement that it would be returned. Instead, the city sold the land to a developer, trying to bring money into the city coffers, not the band's coffers, by way of a golf course expansion and a condo development. So the first slap in the face was a pure robbery from the nation, but of course the other important issue was the desecration to the community's gravesite. Caledonia, Ontario, again, the province borrowed the land in question, which was to be returned. And so we're talking about reserve land that was already given to them, not traditional territory. And so again, they sold it to developers without the band's consent or consideration of any kind. Ipperwash. Land was expropriated from the Crown, by the Crown during World War II and was not given back as promised. Musqueam. Outside of the few treaties that now exist in British Columbia, the rest of this province is unceded territory. As I mentioned, there were hundreds of villages in this region. The Crown, through the Indian Act, established reserves, so we all had to leave our traditional lands. A reserve had to be a population of 100 people, or the tribe ceased to exist. The question was the village of Sisnam. Our oral history told of this place. My great-grandfather walked the area and talked about it to us. The village site held artifacts dating back 4,000 years, and hundreds of bodies were contained there. The federal government deemed the area a National Historic Site, but removed most of the artifacts and the bodies and placed them in museums all over the world. The desecration of the bodies was disgusting because there were so many that a lot of them were simply discarded in the garbage. Even having been a designated National Historic Site, the Crown still saw fit to sell or give pieces of this property away to settlers. The area, however, was capped such that no one could dig there. The ugly row of buildings that sat on it did not penetrate the ground but sat flat on the archaeological cap. In late 2011, however, one of the title holders got a development permit and began digging. Once this started, they began discovering body after body. The discovery of this desecration was determined quite by accident. One of our staff members was driving by the site and saw the backhoe. Due to the fact that the Musqueam people took it upon themselves to physically occupy this village site. Our voices not being heard led us to take our protest to the streets of Vancouver, the Premier's office, the City of Vancouver graveyard, and Robson Street. The province still did not hear our pleas, so we finally blockaded the Arthur Lang Bridge during rush hour, preventing people from getting to work or to their flights at the airport. When I saw Trevor Linden sitting in his car on the bridge, screaming his head off, I knew someone's phone was ringing. Sure enough, the Minister of Aboriginal Relations was finally harangued by reporters. So even the media didn't care about us until that moment. My personal protest of giving back and standing in solidarity. So many people came and joined us at that protest. Gurpreet was called to action by a cab driver who was driving by. The Jewish community stood with us. They were horrified at the desecration of grave sites. They invited me to come and speak at one of their synagogues, and it was the first time that I actually heard shrieks when I was talking about bodies being desecrated. But other groups hold political power. Like, politicians don't care. We don't have enough votes to sway the vote one way or the other. If we have an issue, why should they care about us? Aboriginal people are 1 million people in Canada, that's it. People came from the downtown east side, the poorest people came and stood with us. And these were Native people from all across Canada. The teachers' union, the nurses, cops, firemen, everybody could see that this was disgusting. So everybody wrote letters. I posted the email addresses of bureaucrats and politicians on our Sisnam site, website, Facebook page, and they got letters, and so they were heard. So this is sort of where Idle No More is going. With the current federal government whose strategy seems to be to discredit any person or group who would stand in the way or speak out against its resource-based prosperity agenda, our people were left with no choice but to take to the streets and try to scream our message to anyone within the sound of our voices. Plundering Mother Earth for a quick buck, a buck for only, let's not forget, a few, again to the detriment of First Nations people, sacred sites, burial sites, health, drinking water, culture, livelihood, was not acceptable to us. And to many Canadians, were either just not getting the message or simply didn't care. Well, we were going to show them, so we were idle no more. A group of well-organized women, lawyers, got to work on social media and started the ball rolling on protests and teach-ins for anyone who wished to participate. The current status of Idle No More is the hashtag Sovereignty Summer Initiative. Events are initiated from a main website, and individuals in communities across Canada begin organizing. The Idle No More body has now jumped on hot button issues, and people are mobilized. There has been some press on how the grassroots are divided from the elected leadership, but I'm still seeing both groups come together around important issues. I'm not aware how the overall leadership issue will play out, but I will say that it is not at all unusual to see the types of divisions such as it is also somewhat of an east-west treaty versus non-treaty groups that are having some hurdles. In a country as vast as Canada, this is not an unusual scenario. I'm also seeing the very young just completely fed up and yelling their own messages to the masses. This gives me a personal moment of reflection, wondering at my age, have I done enough? For them and for my own children. I hear the elected leadership with the same sentiments. So I believe, like many movements and protests, it has taken on a life of its own and will continue to move and to grow and change shape, but I do not see it ending anytime soon. Other groups are inviting us in solidarity with Idle No More, such as Defend Our Coast, which is all British Columbians that are worried about their coast, their tourism businesses, their fishing, their waterfront. Anti-racism rallies, and as mentioned, the police brutality issues, which do not only affect First Nations people, but they affect people in poverty, homelessness issues, and many union groups always stand in solidarity with the predicaments that have faced First Nations people. So what can you do? My message today was to enlighten a group of people who may not have been aware of the issues that have faced Aboriginal people. My own father and many of my family members were ripped from their nurturing parents, their cultural environments, and placed in the prison-like states of residential schools. My father was horribly abused, and when he showed academic promise, he was told by the District of North Vancouver, in quotes, "We don't graduate Indians," end quote. His mother and an advocate from the school had to fight for him to obtain a higher education. How many children in that system did not have someone to fight for them? My grandmother was quite a firecracker. He had many demons in his life and many issues with parenting. He suffered alcohol addiction and bouts of horrendous violence towards those he loved. He seriously struggled to find peace. His residential school settlement arrived after he passed away. We have had to learn to parent our kids on our own and have done the very best we know how. We are still a nation of broken people fighting our way back from the brink of near complete genocide. Our call goes out to people of all groups in Canada to stand in solidarity with us, to learn about us, to share this knowledge with your friends, your co-workers, community. Ask your schools to include First Nations curriculums, and not just the curriculum that talks about the explorers who discovered Canada and met some First Nations people. We put out the welcome mat, and then we're obliterated. Apologies have no meaning. They cannot be quick wins with no substance or sincerity, as you well know. So we stand in solidarity today with all of you. We would have welcomed that ship. We're the same kind of people. We love our families, we love our culture. And I think it's pretty ironic that those who discovered us thought they had already discovered India. Yet they turn away the Indians. So I do want to leave you with that message that we stand in solidarity with you, and we hope you stand in solidarity with us. That's it. Otium.
Thank you so much, Cecilia, and to Mary, for your illuminating discussion on the history of your people and the state-sponsored atrocities that took place. Linking the story to the story of Mewa Singh, there live in the archive these oral histories of cooperation between First Nation and South Asian communities that moves beyond just this idea of taike, of being close relatives, but of shared solidarity. And hopefully we can continue on those movements. And thank you once again for allowing us the opportunity to learn from you and to share in your histories. Thank you. I'd like to call upon next Georgia Strait editor Charlie Smith, who will deliver a speech on the history of racism and immigration in Canada and draw a connection between the struggles of South Asian immigrants and the Indigenous people for social justice. Charlie Smith.
Thank you, Naveen. I'm just going to start by encouraging anyone who hasn't looked at the art exhibit by Jarnail Singh. It's really something. He's put a human face on the Komagata Maru, exclusion of the ship coming, and I've been reading about this and reading about the history. And this provided me with another, just putting a face to Gurpreet Singh, to Bog Singh, to Mewa Singh, to William Hopkinson, and what happened when they went back to Calcutta. And it was a very moving experience for me as somebody who's been familiar with this story for a long time. To see it in art was, so I'm going to be writing something up on our website when I get back about your work. So thank you for doing that. And I want to thank you, Cecilia, for just a wonderful speech. And I've been asked by Gurpreet to bring together kind of some of the parallels between the South Asian struggle in British Columbia and the First Nations. I'm not a historian, and I must admit I'm a little nervous with Naveen here, so I encourage Naveen to correct me if I make any errors, and the same I would extend to you, Cecilia. But I am keenly interested in it because I think what we went through was a long period of white supremacy in Canada, and I don't think we've fully acknowledged that and all that has flowed from that and how it's affecting us to this day. So, as many of you know, Gurpreet is a good friend of mine, and he's been contributing columns to our website and to our paper for many years, and that's in addition to his work as a radio host, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. And I see all of these activities, as well as the calendars that he does with the Indo-Canadian Workers Association, and the representatives are here, as well as Radio India. It's part of a broad effort that he's making that is, it's integrated into his life in terms of educating us about our history and bringing us together as a country. And so what I've found interesting observing Gurpreet, how he was affected by the Idle No More movement and seeing the parallels, and this was something I had never considered, between the Gadar movement struggle, which we're celebrating the centenary of this year, and what was happening with the young people and the First Nations. So he's had me thinking a lot about this, and his new book, one of the things he included, which I wasn't aware of until he submitted it as a column, was the first Punjabi paper outside of India was published in Canada in 1910. And then he did a column about the 100-year anniversary of the Gadar Party, and as many of you know, but maybe some of you don't, this was a group of people of South Asian descent here in BC and along the west coast of North America who formed a party and got her from, if I can believe what Gurpreet's saying, is mutiny in Urdu, and that it was taking the struggle to India. And so, and this was not happening in a disconnected way. There was a whole historical series of events that was going on. And one of the things that has been pointed out to me by Sohan, I don't know if is Sohan here? But Sohan Singh Puni was telling me that the continuous migration legislation, which was crafted to stop people of South Asian descent from coming here, it was actually worked on with Britain. So the federal government of Canada was working with Britain to bring in this continuous migration legislation in 1908, which had the effect of stopping people coming here from India. And so, and why would Britain want to do that? Well, part of the problem was the Indians here had a lot more freedom than the Indians in India. And this had the potential to create problems for the British Empire in India, because if the Indians in India started saying, well, how come these Indians who are also in the British Empire, that they can vote, they can do these things? So a bunch of things started happening. So you had the vote taken away in 1907. You had the continuous migration legislation in 1908. You also had some other things happening on the side, which included the riots in Chinatown and Japantown in 1907. In 1908, you also had, with Japanese immigration to BC, where the liberal government of the era actually negotiated with the government of Japan to limit immigration to 1,000 people per year. So basically we had efforts in Canada to stop people coming from Asia. So there was the continuous migration legislation for the people from India. There was the cap on immigration from Japan. But the problem with China was the government was so weak that that Canada couldn't negotiate with the Chinese government because there'd been the Boxer Rebellion. So then they just put a tax, and it started at $50 in 1885, which was, I think, no coincidence when the railway was finished. Went up to $100 in 1900. It went up to $500 in 1903, and then in 1923 they passed legislation basically banning Chinese immigration. So we really had a lot of things happening to the Chinese, to the Indians, and also to the Japanese. And then later with the Japanese, there was what happened in 1941-42 with the internment, where they were taken and put in concentration camps, and their assets were seized and sold off. So this was a very depressing chapter. But what was also happening to the First Nations is there was a man named Duncan Campbell Scott who was kind of driving the federal policy with First Nations people, and basically it was a campaign of extermination, at least culturally, by taking the kids from the schools, from their homes, putting them in residential schools, and prohibiting them from speaking their languages, and basically trying to turn them into fine British subjects. And then when there was resistance, there were all sorts of things that happened. So the First Nations were also under siege. And one of the things I appreciate about the work Naveen has been doing, as well as other people, has been showing how sometimes these people who were facing oppression actually worked together. And so you had the Chinese and the First Nations, and the Musqueam in particular with the Grant family, and that there is a real history of connectivity there, that because they were wiped out of the history books, because people of color were not allowed to be in the professions, they weren't allowed to be politicians, they were basically marginalized, that this is not known to the general public to the degree. So that's why I really appreciate seeing, a Musqueam presentation to open an event for an immigrant from India who's written about historical oppression in Canada. And I think that type of activity was actually happening a long time ago. And there are people who've been working to bring attention to this. And Hugh Johnston, an historian, has written extensively about the Komagata-Maru. There's Sohan Pooney, who I've mentioned. I see Pervez Summer in the back with her students and what she's doing in terms of educating people about this history. Although I think you're at film school now, right? But you'll be back. But Pervez was teaching at Kwantlen. You've got the work of Naveen. You've got the work of Gurpreet. So I see an awakening taking place. And also with Harsha Walia. I see you in the back, Harsha, and the work you've been doing with First Nations has been quite extraordinary and impressive, and Harjap. So we see this integration and this connection still happening to this day. And I think it's important to let the young people know about these Canadian stories, which, as you've mentioned, were not taught in school. And I know they weren't taught in school because I was teaching at Kwantlen, teaching journalism, and trying to get the young reporters ready to be journalists, and I was stunned how little they knew. They didn't know about Komagata-Maru. They didn't know about the Japanese internment. They knew very little about the head tax. And it really made me question what was happening in the schools in that period. That was 1998 to 2005, so I can't speak necessarily of what's happening now. There may have been some changes. But I was quite distressed that these things were not known, and to see people like Summer, like Gurpreet, like Naveen, trying to fill that gap. I think what they're doing is that this is engaging young people's curiosity. It's possibly leading them, to an interest in a life of scholarship, but most importantly, reducing the sense of alienation that comes from feeling that you don't belong. And let's not kid ourselves. Alienation is one of the reasons kids end up in gangs and engage in criminal activity if they don't feel a sense of connectivity. And alienation leads people to not want to vote, not to engage in the community. And there's research from polling organizations that show that people of color who are born in Canada, I haven't seen it recently, but I've read it in the past, are less likely to vote. And by countering this alienation and helping people achieve a sense of rootedness, Gurpreet and the others are, I think, providing a very valuable service. So this book that you've written is helping to connect people to their past and to their roots, and I think that's extremely important. I think we're seeing it with the Idle No More movement as well, where you can see these young people just coming alive and feeling a sense of connection and feeling that I can make a difference. That is really exciting to see. I saw a young woman on the stage of the art gallery, and she was buoyant as she was speaking, and she says, "We survived genocide." And it was like, we can do anything. And it was so exciting to see. And so I'm feeling very optimistic about where things are going from here. But I think it takes hard work and dedication. And I applaud all of you for having the curiosity to come out and hear and, listen to someone like me prattle on for a few minutes. But I would encourage you to think about that and the importance of that sense of connection to our past. So this is why I think the work that Gurpreet's doing is very important, because I think it is without that connection, without that understanding, it breeds alienation, and alienation brings all sorts of other problems with it. So I think I'll close with that and pass the microphone on to Naveen.
Welcoming us to their territory, and thank you to everyone here for coming today. I've been working with Gurpreet for a number of years, helping to edit his articles, printing some of them in people's voice, and it's been an honor to help in this process of rediscovering important elements of the history of this country. As a journalist, as a former history student at university, I'm acutely aware of the saying that history is written by the winners. And that's certainly the history of Canada. We have a very flattened version of what has happened in this country over the last several hundred years and before that, where certain things are erased from the picture or distorted or even reported in the exact opposite way they happened. Certain things are celebrated and other things are denigrated, and it reflects a very racist colonial version of what this country is, how everybody came to be here, what our part is in this country. And I think the story of Mewa Singh and the Gadar Party in Canada is a very important example of how this comes to be. You know, why is it that certain episodes in the history of this country are seen as glorious occasions, you know, when people take up arms for one reason or another to fight oppression or to achieve certain goals for certain elements of ruling classes? You know, why is it that General Wolfe is a great Canadian hero, for example, but Louis Riel from my Métis people is still widely seen as a traitor? It is a shameful example of the way that Canadian history is presented in our society. You know, why is it you know, that we hear on television almost every day the story of Laura Secord, but we never hear of the Gadar Party activists who in a different way played a major contribution to the building of this country. I think it's very revealing about how we define ourselves. There are certain things that are seen as quintessentially Canadian and other things that are simply written out of history because they are the actions of so-called troublemakers, people that we would rather forget because they made problems for the ruling class. They made us uncomfortable. We'd rather just ignore them, pretend it didn't happen. And sometimes that even affects our own families. You know, my father's family, on one side were Cree Métis people, but there came a point when they could accept the white skin privilege because most of them looked pretty white, and there was a sort of a collective decision they would simply not talk about that. And for 70 years or so, it was not spoken of in our family. That Métis heritage was absolutely denied. My father is in his 80s now. He has never agreed to speak a single word of his family's real history to any of his children. Other people in the family have taken a different route and gotten their Métis Society memberships and are celebrating our history now. But I think it really shows something about, as I said, how Canadian society defines itself. So the work that is being done now to bring to light some of the forgotten or whitewashed parts of Canadian history, I think is extremely crucial for us to understand who we are. And the history of racism in British Columbia is one of those episodes that we really need to explore, to search through the archives, to bring to light these facts. Because it's possible to cover over history for a certain period of time, but it's never possible to completely eliminate it. And with careful research and diligence and studies such as Gurpreet Singh has done and others, these things are being understood better. The full history of what's happened in this country is beginning to come to light, such as the fact that part of the history of this country is the fact that radical-minded people from India, people who wanted a better life for themselves, came here, and they did not give up their resistance to British colonialism, to imperialism. Some of them maybe thought they could escape it, but as soon as they got here, they found out differently, and they began to organize in various ways to overcome that oppression, to find a better life for themselves, and they quickly ran into some real stubborn resistance from the ruling class, and we saw what happened in the case of the early years of the Gadar Party here. where every weapon was used to try and crush this insurgent movement, to wipe it out, to prevent it from spreading, for the reasons that Charlie Smith has talked about. But they couldn't. You know, some of those activists went on to play very important roles back in India, some of them even here in Canada and North America. They inspired others to carry on. Some of the people who organized the Woodworkers Union, for example, in this country, or fought the struggle for the right to vote for all in Canada, they were inspired by the history of what happened here in this particular piece of land 100 years ago. So that history, it might have been covered up and obscured, but it did not go away. It continued to live in the hearts and minds of the people. And now it's beginning to be told in a more organized and public way. So we are very proud to be part of this process. On behalf of People's Voice and the editorial board, I want to thank Gurpreet for the work he has done and congratulate him for this important book and for all the work that he has done. And we hope to continue collaborating with you in this, this very crucial effort in the years to come. Thank you.
That Hindustani paper had an article in it, and every month they would talk about an immigrant's perspective on Canada, to the point where they talk about their favorite Chinese restaurants to go to because that's the places where they wouldn't face discrimination. So it's one of those things where those intercultural stories were always taking place. So these papers linked in San Francisco to Portland to Vancouver to India, and all those stories linked together and created the context for the Kalmagadamu incidents and Mewa Singh's actions. So those intercultural stories are always there, and of course history is written by the victors, but for us perhaps the game is still going on. There's no end game yet. Our final speaker before we have the launch of the book is former BC Human Rights Commissioner Harinder Mahil, who will explain how racism and discriminatory policies in Canada contributed to the acts of resistance by the Indigenous peoples and South Asian immigrants, and how these challenges continue to prevail. Harinderji.
Well, thank you, Naveen. You know, I've been a trade unionist for much of my life, and I'm still getting introduced as a former commissioner of BC Human Rights. I want to just, put away my prepared comments, and I just want to respond to some of what our panel members have said. Cecilia, you came here and stood in solidarity with us. We stand in solidarity with you and with the Native people of this country who have been, what the Canadian government has done to the First Nations is criminal, is beyond criminal. I mean, most of those politicians who've done this should be in jail, because here are the people who have welcomed you and you treat them this way. You destroy their languages, you destroy their culture, and take the kids away from them. Put them in basically in concentration camps, so they will not remember their culture, they will not remember their traditions. What can be more criminal than that? I feel bad that I haven't personally done enough to stand in solidarity with you, and that's why I applaud people like Harshan and Harjap who's doing this. And Gurpreet, we get so involved in some of our minor problems, we don't stand with one another, and that's our problem. And the government gets away with it. The government is getting, and Harper is getting away with it now. I mean, the way he's treating the First Nations, the way he's treating the trade union movement, and through some of his backbenchers. I want to come back and first of all thank Mr. Janelle Singh for the wonderful exhibit that he's got in this other room. If you haven't seen, please go and see it. I want to congratulate Gurpreet for writing this book. I want to congratulate those who have encouraged them to do it and to talk about and speak about and write about these issues which are important to our history. Well, history is important because of what our history is all about. You wouldn't know me until you know who I am, where I came from, what my roots are, who were my forefathers, what kind of struggle they've gone through. Similarly, I wouldn't know you unless I know your history. We learn from history so that we become better people, so that we have better control over our future. So I applaud Gurpreet for writing about the kinds of issues you've been writing about. Now, I was asked to talk about how the discriminatory policies of the government make us resist with the First Nations and South Asian immigrants. I mean, I've been thinking about this issue, and I think the best thing I can do is talk about some events, talk about some historical events, my own experiences, and how they relate to our struggle for equality. Well, I came here in 1970 at the age of 19. I worked in some farms for a few months. My first real job was in a sawmill, because at that point in time, I saw more than half of the workers in sawmills were Indo-Canadians. I became active in the union. I started attending union meetings because I had been, active in the student union movement. I thought it was something similar. I became a member of the New Westminster Local of the IWA. We used to have monthly meetings in New Westminster. One day, an older member said to me, I want you to come with me, we're going to go see Harold. Well, I said, fine. It took me to a small place, a house either in Coquitlam or Port Coquitlam. I didn't know who this person was. It turned out to be a person by the name of Harold Pritchett. He was the first international president of the IWA. He offered me a beer. He pulled out a drawer of photographs. To my amazement, he was talking about Indo-Canadian community. He showed me photographs of the delegation that had gone to Victoria either in 46 or 47, and to meet with the ministers to demand that the Indo-Canadians should have the right to vote in British Columbia. He was part of that delegation. Now, I later learned, because Indo-Canadians there were so many members of the IWA, that some of the progressive elements of the IWA were really, felt the discrimination being felt by Indo-Canadians. Well, he showed me some flyers from mills, sawmills, and plywood mills that clearly showed Indo-Canadians and Chinese there was a Chinese rate of pay for Chinese, another rate of pay for Indo-Canadians, and a higher rate of pay for white Canadians. He talked about the discrimination faced by the trade unionists in 30s and 40s, how they had to not only contend with the police, but also the company goons. He talked about the discrimination faced by the Indo-Canadian community. It was a fascinating conversation. I was 20 years old and Harold must have been in 70s. I regret the day I never got to meet him again. I became active in the IWA. In 1972, I was hired as the editor of the local union's paper called The Chipper. And I would help out in organizing drives. One of the first organizing drives I was involved in a small place called Consumer Pallet. It was a small mill in Burnaby. I know Raj worked there for a few months, but I think he may have left before the organizing drive. The issue really was the way the employer treated Indo-Canadian workers. It took a violent struggle to unionize this place. Soon after we unionized it, the workers went on strike because the employer was not willing to pay higher wages. They paid much lower wages and benefits than the rest of the mills. The employer continued to operate. The trade union movement in 70s was quite strong. the BC Federation of Labor declared a hot edict on the products of this outfit. So when they take out the trucks with the products, the members, mostly Indo-Canadian, would follow them. There were a lot of injuries, a lot of cars were smashed, but eventually we were able to win the strike. But what was significant, not the improvement in wages and conditions, what was significant to the workers was the treatment they received after this, because they had the union behind them. They felt that's much more precious to us than the improvement in our wages. Soon after that, I became involved in organizing farm workers. Raj is here, Sharon is here. We set up a committee called Farm Workers Organizing Committee. What was troubling to us, not only the way the workers were treated in the farms, there was no protection, no legislative protection. Another worker, if worked for an employer, even a non-union employer, could go to the Employment Standards Branch, whatever it was called in those days, and say this employer didn't pay my wages. Not the farm workers. Not only did not have protection under the hours of work, minimum wages, or anything else, they could not even complain that they have not been paid. I remember in '79, a demonstration going outside the Hyatt Regency Hotel and presenting a petition to Bill Bennett, asking for legislation, protection under the existing legislation for farm workers. We submitted a brief on behalf of the committee, of which I was a member, but basically said the farm workers should be treated no different than any other worker. There should be equality under the law. I mean, what was heartening to us, we were a group of small committee members. The support we received from the labor movement, BC Federation of Labor, Canadian Labour Congress, the Independent Union, CCU, they all came out and supported us. I think we made enough noise that they were ashamed to bring us under the Employment Standards Act, bring the farm workers under the Employment Standards Act. And although that equality, that struggle still continues, because the equality is still not there. Although the workers were brought under the Employment Standards Act, the protection they have is still inferior to other workers. Just around the same time, although our focus was farm workers, there were a whole bunch of attacks, racist attacks on members of our community. Ku Klux Klan was organizing. There was a farm bombing somewhere in Delta. There was a young man was killed, and people would come and attack homes, throw eggs. I mean, when you are a new immigrant in a new land, that's extremely unsettling, extremely stressful. And we set up an organization called BC Organization to Fight Racism. By the way, I had a very small role in all of this. There were a whole lot of other people. When we set up the BC Organization to Fight Racism, the first meeting, the founding meeting, took place at the office of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs. There was a woman by the name of Rose Letizia, who was one of the prominent members of that organization, who was one of the founding members of that organization. And so was, there was a trade union member from Telephone Worker Union, Stuart Rush, who was one of the progressive lawyers. They were all serving on this organization. I mean, the point I'm trying to make is this organization was set up because there was a need at that time. Whenever there's a need, people respond by organizing. You know, I don't need to talk about the history of discrimination. All of the panel members, Cecilia talked about it, Charlie talked about it, Kim talked about it. You know, going back to the issue of 1906-7, immigration of South Asians. I think it was 1906 and 7, the 4,700 Indians came that is East Indians, came to Canada, primarily Sikhs, and there was such a response, almost hysterical response by the white Canadians, because what was being written about in the press. And there was something called Asiatic Exclusion League that took out a demonstration which caused all the damage in Chinatown in 1907. What Charlie talked about, the changes to the Immigration Act in 1908, 1909, around this time, which basically the government could take steps by order in council. It didn't have to be discussed or debated in Parliament. Basically, the cabinet could pass cabinet orders, and that's how the continuous journey rule was brought in. I mean, we all know what happened to the Komagata Maru. When the ship wasn't allowed to dock, it was the community that raised funds for the court case. When they were running out of rations, it was the community that gathered the funds to supply the rations to the ship. And that sort of brings me to what's happening now. The struggle for equality still continues, despite the fact that we're able to elect people like Jimmy Singh to Parliament, people like Raj Chauhan, Harry Bez to the legislature. And the issue really is, can we stand with one another? Can we stand with our Native brothers and sisters to see what's going on? Cecilia said it right. What does it mean to apologize? Yes. I mean, Harper did that personally and said, it's going to be a new chapter. We're going to deal with each other with respect. Well, since that time, all kinds of funding that goes out to First Nations has been cut, and without any kind of discussion. It's to the point that there's a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and the federal government is not even sharing the documents with that commission. Which brings me to the conclusion, I mean, we talked about Idle No More, was the largest mobilization of First Nation people. It wasn't spontaneous, it had been brewing for many, many years. So basically the conclusion is the struggle continues. There's likely to be many more actions on the part of First Nations to bring about the equality that we really need in this country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ji. Now we come to the time where we want to launch Gurpreet Singh's book. Congratulations once again. If we could have Gurpreet Singh Ji come to the front. And along with him, I want to make a couple of announcements. You're here at the front, congratulations. Round of applause, please. Gurpreet Ji will be saying a few words at the end of the event, but I want to say that his book was launched with great fanfare in India simultaneously, just on Friday, where Jagmohan Singh, the nephew of Bhagat Singh, and the leader of the All India Democratic Forum released this book. So congratulations to you once again. Along with Gurpreet Ji, if we could have some descendants of the other activists and freedom fighters who are in the audience to come up to the stage as well too to help release this book, that would be great. I'll call your names if you could please come. Mr. Sohan Singh Man, the nephew of Bhuja Singh. Bibi Veera, the adopted daughter of Sohan Singh Bakna. Dharamveer Gangar, son of Mangu Ram Manguwal. Mr. Manjeet Dhillon, the grandson of Naranjar Singh Pandori. Ajay Singh Hans, the descendant of Uttam Singh Hans. Charanpal Gill, the grandson of Abdullah Singh Jalaluddin Wala. Jaswinder Kaur, the grandson of Puran Singh Janatpur. Kenya. Ms. Harjeet Dhillon, the daughter of Mewa Singh. Jagjit Singh Grewal, the son of Harnam Singh Parwana. Mr. Tood, please come up as well too. Haji. Charanpal ji, Mr. Tood, please come on up. Thank you so much, ji. Thank you so much, Ji, and congratulations once again, Gurpreet Ji. While many of you are here, we'd also like to ask some of you to come up from the audience and say a few words. We have Mr. Manjeet Dhillon, the grandson of Niranjan Singh Pandori. We're to ask him to say a few words and relate a Gadar poem as well too.
मानजोग बुजुर्गों ते साथियों, बड़ी खुशी हुई है तुहानू मिल के। तो सब तो पहला गुरप्रीत होना ते बाकी सारे साथियों का बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, इन्हें सानू इकट्ठे किया। तो नाल ही मैं दो कप तो हम मैनू कहनी पैनी, इन मैनू एक आख्या सीगा, एक तो हम सिर्फ दो मिनट दियाँ दो एक कविता है जी। सो पहली कविता तो हैगी मेरे बाबा जी गद्दी बाबा नंद सिंह ने लिखी हुई है। उन्हीं सारिया कविता अपने साथी हिंद सेवक के अंडर लिखिया। तो पहली कविता है गदर पार्टी का जन्मदिन। जन्मदिन गदर पार्टी का इनकलाबियों तुसां बधाई होवे। ਉਹੀ ਜਾਣਦਾ कदर इस दिन की सिर धड़ा की जिसने लाई होवे। बेलड़ जानते कि कदर कामियां की जिन्हें पीनी ही रत पराई होवे। वफादार हैं वो फरंगियां दे जिन्हें कपट की सवा बिछाई होवे। गुज्जे भेद पींदे खून गदरियां का नाम आत्मा दिलों कसाई होवे। नहीं लोड़ सबूत की होर बाकी अखा सामने जो अजमाई होवे। ना दुश्मना गुफ्तगू हो रही है फांसी गदरियां ले गड़ाई होवे। ऊधम सिंह ते सिंह करतार होना कांसी राम जी करी चढ़ाई होवे। चंदा चाढ़ के कपट की सुरा वाला कीती गदरियां दिलों सफाई होवे। दाद देन फरंगियां जालमां दी वतन दर्दियां वास्ते ताई होवे। कतरा कतरा निचोड़ के गदरियां दा खप्पर बिच इंग्लैंड दे पाई होवे। ऐसे लोग पापी साडे नहीं डरदे जिन्हां वैरियां फतेह दवाई होवे। साथी उसनूं समझ तू हिंद सेवक ਜਿਹੜਾ आखिरी अनसाही होवे, ਜਿਹੜਾ आखिरी अनसाही होवे। सो दूजी कविता है जी शहीद भाई मेवा सिंह की याद दे विच शहीद भाई मेवा सिंह की याद दे विच मेरे डैडी गुरदेव सिंह ढिल्लों की कविता लिखी हुई है अमर कहानी। अमर कहानी मेवा सिंघा तेरी अमर कहानी। तू ये रची है लोकां खातर ना ये होवे कदे पुरानी। जींदे रहन जिन्ना चिर हिंदी इस धर दे उत्ते ना भुल्लण तैनूं योधिया तू दुद्धो छाणे पानी। बिच परदेसी खट्टण खातर चीर आए बहुत सागर खारे। पराधीन बेगैरत हिंदी कह के गैरा ने फटकारे। तू संकट कट्टे काल कलाही खून जिगर दा पाके। वो गैरतमंदा रख दिखाई तूने लाए लारे। जो कुछ दिसदा इहो ना हुंदा हुंदी बड़ी बरानी ना ये ਧੀਆਂ ना ये बच्चे ना इत्थे वसदे हिंदुस्तानी कुनबे ना ये इकट्ठे हुंदे ना मौजां दे मेले जे ना लगदी मेवा ਸਿੰਘਾ तेरी सिख जवानी तू ये कीता लोकां खातर ए भारत दे नेक दे लारे देश कौम दी लज्जा रखी ते लोकां दी चमक मनारे सेरे वन क्षमा ते सड़िया तू परवाना बन के लोकां खातर मन वालिया जाइए बलहारे मेवा ਸਿੰਘਾ जय जय होवे जय जय तेनू जय जय कारे मेवा ਸਿੰਘਾ जय जय होवे जय तेनू Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manjeet ji. Manjeet ji has been a personal help to me many times before in the past with his help, with the history that you know, Auntie ji as well too. And speaking of Auntie ji, why don't you come up as well too and say a few words. Ms. Harjeet Dilno, please. Thank you, ji.
I'll speak few words in Punjabi, although I can speak a little bit English. ਸਾਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਖੁਸ਼ੀ ਆ ਗੁਰਪ੍ਰੀਤ ਹੋਣਾ ਵਰਗੇ ਨੌਜਵਾਨ ਸਾਡੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸ਼ਾਮਲ ਹੋਏ ਆ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਤੋਂ ਆ ਕੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਰਹਿੰਦਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਦੇਰ ਹੋ ਗਈ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਹੁਣ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪੁਰਾਣੇ ਬੰਦੇ ਸੀ ਉਹ ਥੱਕ ਵੀ ਗਏ ਆ ਤੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਨਵਾਂ ਮਸਾਲਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਚਿਰਾਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਮਿਲਿਆ ਇਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਅਸੀਂ ਹੁਣ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਨੂੰ ਫੇਰ ਨਵੇਂ ਸਮਝਣ ਲੱਗ ਪਏ ਹਾਂ ਤੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਜੋਸ਼ ਆਉਣ ਲੱਗ ਪੈਂਦਾ ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਫੰਕਸ਼ਨਾਂ ਤੇ ਜਾਈਦਾ ਆ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਖੁਸ਼ੀ ਆ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਡੀ ਹਿਸਟਰੀ ਨੂੰ ਫਿਰ ਨਵੇਂ ਸਿਰਿਓਂ ਚਾਲੂ ਕੀਤਾ ਤੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਬਹੁਤ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਵਧਾਈ ਹੋਵੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਧੰਨਵਾਦੀ ਹਾਂ ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ ਵੈਰੀ ਮਚ
Thank you, Auntie ji. Auntie ji and Uncle ji have been great help to many of us in the historical community who want to know more about our history. They have a great resource, a great archive. Thank you so much for helping us out. It's a collection of family members here and friends as well too, so pardon me if I call people by the first names, but Harsha is in the audience. Harsha, do you mind come up and sing a few words for us? Harsha, who's a great community activist and works with No One Is Illegal. Harsha Walia. Just say a few words.
Thank you, Naveen. Congratulations to Gurpreet. Can we have another round of applause for Gurpreet's third or fourth book in 1 year? It's incredible and such an honor and an asset to our community. I'd like to start by giving thanks to Cecilia and Mary for welcoming us to Musqueam territory, Stolo territory, the shared territories of the Coast Salish people, jinki zameen pe hum hain. Shukriya. I will be brief. I'm really honored and excited by the words that the panelists shared in the political context of struggle, the fact that this history is not over, the fact that our struggle continues on so many levels in terms of the struggles in the South Asian community that continues, particularly if we look at immigration struggles under the Tory government. That's an ongoing struggle, and there's so many layers to this, right? We know how hard it is for our families to come now to Canada, how hard it is to get any sort of permanent immigration status in Canada, the ongoing legacy of genocide against Indigenous people on these territories. And this has been an important week because, as we know, this is a week where there's been a National Day of Action to honor the apology because of the nutritional experiments, what they call nutritional experiments, in schools, in residential schools, but what we know is just another form of slow genocide, a horrific, shameful history. And so there's been calls to honor the apology, but this is also the fifth year of the Harper government's apology for the Kamagata Maru. It's the 99th anniversary. Last week was the 99th anniversary of the exclusion of the Kamagata Maru, and I think this week for me, I've been reflecting a lot on what these two so-called apologies have meant. And the fact that actually these apologies have been symbolic, right? That there's actually so much more that we need to do. And so really big thank you to Gurpreet for all that he does to lift up community voices and community resistance in our community. from indigenous struggles to immigration struggles to what is happening in India, and the fact that really this land and this planet is being destroyed, right? Resource extraction, mining, oil and gas, whether it's in India, whether it's here on Turtle Island, is really at the core of this profit-seeking motive in this world that we live in. And so Gurpreet has done so much in such a short amount of time for so many of our struggles. So thank you so much, and such a big congratulations for all that you do for our community and for this book as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Harsha. Thank you so much. Our panelists have mentioned the long history of connections between union workers and political advocacy, even going back to early 1940s, when the right to vote was being led by people like Naginder Singh, the secretary of the Second Avenue Gurdwara. There are these reams of letters that he'd sent off to different union groups asking for support, and all of that came back in positive ways. We have with us today the president of the Indo-Canadian Workers Association, Surinder Sangha. I'd just him to say a few words, a community leader of Gadar community events, and who worked intimately on the creation on the Gadar community calendar. Surinder ji. Thank you.
ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਅੱਜ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਗੁਰਪ੍ਰੀਤ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਮੇਵਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਬਾਰੇ ਇਹ ਹੁਣ ਰਿਲੀਜ਼ ਹੋਈ ਆ, ਮੈਂ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਗੁਰਪ੍ਰੀਤ ਨੂੰ ਇਸ ਗੱਲ ਦੀ ਵਧਾਈ ਦਿੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਇਸ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਹ ਆਪਣੇ ਭਾਈ ਮੇਵਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਬੁੱਕ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਰਿਸਰਚ ਦਾ ਪੇਪਰ ਉੱਥੇ UBC 'ਚ ਦਿੱਤਾ, ਉਹਦੇ 'ਚ ਜਿਸ ਢੰਗ ਨਾਲ ਮੇਵਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸ਼ਹਾਦਤ ਆ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਜਿਸ ਢੰਗ ਨਾਲ ਬਹੁਤ ਸੋਹਣੇ ਥੋੜ੍ਹੇ ਲਫ਼ਜ਼ਾਂ 'ਚ ਉਲੀਕ ਕੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਰੱਖਿਆ, ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਪਤਾ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਵੀ ਗੁਰਪ੍ਰੀਤ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਯੋਗਤਾ ਆ ਉਸ ਪੁਆਇੰਟ ਨੂੰ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਰੱਖਣ ਦੀ ਯੋਗਤਾ ਹੈ। ਮੈਂ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇਹਦਾ ਮਿੱਤਰ ਵੀ ਹਾਂ ਅਤੇ ਇਹ ਤੋਂ ਉੱਦਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਬੜਾ ਹਾਂ, ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਮਿਲਦੇ ਜੁਲਦੇ ਰਹੇ ਜਦ ਤੋਂ ਇਹ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਤੋਂ ਆਇਆ। ਉਹਦੇ 'ਚ ਇਹ ਕਿਤਾਬ 'ਚ ਇੱਕ ਪਹਿਰਾ ਮੇਰੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਲਿਖਿਆ, ਮੈਂ ਸਮਝਦਾ ਵੀ ਉਹ 'ਚ ਕਈ ਉਹ 'ਚ ਮੇਰੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਵਾਧੂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਲਿਖੀਆਂ, ਪਰ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਇਸ ਗੱਲ ਦੀ ਖੁਸ਼ੀ ਆ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪੁਆਇੰਟ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਡਿਸਕਸ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀ ਅਤੇ ਲਗਾਤਾਰ ਇਹਨ ਆਪਣੀ ਸਮਝ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹ ਪਾ ਕੇ ਜਿਸ ਢੰਗ ਨਾਲ ਉਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਇਹਨੇ ਲਿਖਿਆ, ਮੈਨੂੰ ਉਹਦੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਖੁਸ਼ੀ ਆ। ਕੰਗਰੈਚੁਲੇਸ਼ਨ ਗੁਰਪ੍ਰੀਤ। ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਸੁਸੀਲੀਆ ਹੋਣੀ, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਨੇਟਿਵਜ਼ ਪੀਪਲ ਨਾਲ ਇੱਥੇ ਦੀ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਨੇ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਤੀਆਂ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ, ਉਹ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਰੱਖੀਆਂ। ਮੈਂ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਐਸੋਸੀਏਸ਼ਨ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਸਹਿਮਤ ਹਾਂ ਵੀ ਹੈਵ ਗੁੱਡ ਸੋਲੀਡੈਰਿਟੀ ਵਿਦ ਯੂਰ ਕਾਜ਼। ਅਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਅਪੀਲ ਕਰਦਾ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਗਲਤਫਹਿਮੀਆਂ, ਮੈਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਲੁਕਾਉਣਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ। ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਕਹਿ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਜੀ ਕੰਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦੇ, ਇਹ ਲੇਜ਼ੀ ਆ, ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਭੁੱਲ ਜਾਓ। ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਤੀਆਂ ਨੇਟਿਵ ਪੀਪਲ ਨਾਲ ਇੱਥੇ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ, ਇੱਥੇ ਦੇ ਸਿਸਟਮ ਨੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਬਰਦਾਸ਼ਤ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ। ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਤੀਆਂ ਵੀ ਹੋਈਆਂ, ਪਰ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਈਆਂ ਜੋ ਕੁਛ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਜੈਨੋਸਾਈਡ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕੀਤਾ। ਇਹ ਦੁਨੀਆ 'ਚ ਇੱਥੇ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਿਸਟਮ ਆ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਨੂੰ ਰਖਵਾਲਾ ਸਮਝਦਾ ਹਿਊਮਨ ਰਾਈਟਸ ਦਾ, ਤਾਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੇਟਿਵ ਪੀਪਲ ਦੇ ਰਾਈਟਸ ਉਹ ਕਿੱਥੇ ਗਏ? ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਮਾਫੀਆਂ ਮੰਗਣ ਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਤਾਂ ਆ ਜੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ 'ਤੇ ਸਹੀ ਅਰਥਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਉੱਥੇ ਅਮਲ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਵੇ, ਸਕੂਲਾਂ ਦੇ ਕਰਿਕੂਲਮ 'ਚ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਪੜ੍ਹਾਇਆ ਜਾਵੇ। ਅਤੇ ਦੂਜੀ ਗੱਲ, ਇਹ ਮੇਰੇ 3 ਪੁਆਇੰਟ ਆ, ਥੋੜ੍ਹਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਟਾਈਮ ਲੱਗ ਜਾਣਾ, ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਸ਼ੇਅਰ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਕਰਨੇ ਆ। ਹੁਣ ਸਾਡੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ 'ਚ ਅਪੋਲੋਜਾਈਜ਼ ਦਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਰਿਵਾਜ ਪੈ ਗਿਆ, ਅਸੀਂ ਲਗਾਤਾਰ ਅਪੋਲੋਜਾਈਜ਼ਾਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਇਹ ਕਰਾਉਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਉਹਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਮਝਦੀ, ਅਪੋਲੋਜਾਈਜ਼ ਹੁਣ ਪਾਰਕ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋਈ ਆ ਕਾਮਾਗਾਟਾ ਮਾਰੂ ਦੀ, ਕੀ ਉਹ ਅਪੋਲੋਜਾਈਜ਼ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੋਈ ਆ ਉੱਥੇ ਉਹਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਮਤਲਬ ਹੈ? ਉਸੇ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਆ ਜੇਸਨ ਕੈਨੀ, ਮੈਨੂੰ ਇਸ ਕਹਿਣ 'ਚ ਕੋਈ ਹਰਜ ਨਹੀਂ, ਹੁਣ ਜੋ ਕੁਛ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਨੂੰ ਓਵਰਹਾਲ ਕਰਕੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਤੀਆਂ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ, ਕੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਅਪੋਲੋਜਾਈਜ਼ ਨਾਲ ਖੁਸ਼ ਹੋ ਜਾਵਾਂਗੇ? ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਨਹੀਂ। ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸ਼ਰਮ ਆਉਣੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਆ। ਸਾਡੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਗਦਰੀ ਸੀਗੇ ਯੋਧੇ, ਜਿਹਨੀ ਕੁਰਬਾਨੀਆਂ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ, ਜਿਹਨੀ ਐਕਟਿਵਿਜ਼ਮ ਦਾ ਕੰਮ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਿਖਾਇਆ, ਕੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਚੇਤੇ ਰੱਖਿਆ? ਸਾਡੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ 'ਚ ਕੀ ਹਾਲਾ ਨਾਰਾ ਵੱਜਿਆ? ਆਉਣੇ ਵਾਲੀਆਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਜਨਰੇਸ਼ਨਾਂ ਉਹ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਮਾਫ ਕਰਨਗੀਆਂ? ਸਾਡੇ ਪੇਰੈਂਟਸ ਨਹੀਂ ਆ ਸਕਦੇ, ਸਾਡੇ ਤੇ 100 ਰਿਸਟ੍ਰਿਕਸ਼ਨਾਂ ਲੱਗ ਗਈਆਂ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕ੍ਰਿਮੀਨਲ ਬਣਾਤਾ। ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਗੱਲ ਆ ਉਹੋ ਹੀ ਹਾਲਾਤ ਪੈਦਾ ਹੋਏ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਪੈਦਾ ਹੋਏ ਸੀ। ਅੱਜ ਮੇਵਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੂੰ ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਯਾਦ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ, ਸਾਡਾ ਇਹ ਫਰਜ਼ ਬਣਦਾ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਵਧੀਕੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਖਿਲਾਫ ਡਟ ਕੇ ਲੜੀਏ। ਦੂਜਾ ਪੁਆਇੰਟ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਾਂਝਾ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ, ਮੇਵਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੂੰ ਭਾਈ ਭਾਗ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸ਼ਹਾਦਤ ਆ, ਮੇਵਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੂੰ ਹਾਪਕਿੰਸਨ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਟੱਕਰ ਤਾਂ ਲੈਣੀ ਪਈ ਆ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉਹ ਹਾਲਾਤ ਉਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਇਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਬਣ ਚੁੱਕੇ ਸੀ। ਕੀ ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਜੇ ਦੇਖੀਏ, ਜੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਦਾ ਸਿਸਟਮ ਇਹ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ, ਇੱਥੇ ਦੀਆਂ ਸਰਕਾਰਾਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੀਆਂ ਕਿ ਉਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਤੀਆਂ ਹੋਈਆਂ, ਕਾਮਾਘਾਟਾ ਮਾਰੂ ਦਾ ਜਹਾਜ਼ ਮੋੜਿਆ ਗਿਆ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਹਾਂਡਰਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੱਢਣ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਗਈ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਵੋਟ ਦਾ ਹੱਕ ਖੋਇਆ ਗਿਆ, ਸੋ ਹੋਰ ਬੰਸਾਂ ਲਾਈਆਂ ਗਈਆਂ, ਟੱਬਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਵਿਗਾੜ ਦਿੱਤੇ ਗਏ। ਕੀ ਜੇ ਉਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਅੱਜ ਹੁਣ ਇਹ ਉਸ ਗੱਲ ਦੀਆਂ ਮਾਫੀਆਂ ਮੰਗਦੇ ਆ? ਸਾਡੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਦੇ ਪਾਇਨੀਅਰ ਸੀ, ਸਾਡੇ ਗਦਰੀ ਸੀ, ਜੇ ਉਹ ਆਪਣੀ ਸੱਚੀ ਮੰਗ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀ, ਉਹ ਸੱਚੀ ਮੰਗ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ, ਉਹ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਸਹੀ ਸੀ। ਇਹ ਉਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਗਲਤ ਸੀ, ਅੱਜ ਆਪਣੀਆਂ ਗਲਤੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਰੈਕਟ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ। ਉਹ ਜੇ ਸਹੀ ਮਾਇਨਿਆਂ 'ਚ ਕਰਨ ਤਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹ ਮੰਨਣ ਨੂੰ ਤਿਆਰ ਹਾਂ, ਪਰ ਉਹ ਸਹੀ ਮਾਇਨੇ 'ਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦੇ। ਇੱਥੇ ਜਿੰਨੀ ਸਿਮਜੋਣੀ ਸਾਡੇ 'ਚ ਬੈਠੇ ਆ, ਇਹ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਕ੍ਰਿਟਿਕ ਆ, ਇਹਨੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਕਿੰਨੀ ਟੱਕਰ ਲਈ ਆ ਕਮੇਟੀ ਸਟੇਜ ਤੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਬਿੱਲਾਂ ਦੀ, ਇਹ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਣਗੇ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ। ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਮੈਂ ਅੱਜ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਬੇਨਤੀ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ, ਸਾਡੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਐਕਟਿਵਿਜ਼ਮ ਦੀ ਘਾਟ ਹੋ ਗਈ ਆ। ਉਸ ਖਸਾਰੇ ਨੂੰ ਦੂਰ ਕਰਨ ਲਈ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਅੱਜ ਅਹਿਦ ਕਰਕੇ ਜਾਣਾ ਪਊਗਾ। ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਗੁਰਪ੍ਰੀਤ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਮੈਂਸ਼ਨ ਕੀਤਾ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਉਸ ਐਕਟਿਵਿਜ਼ਮ ਨੂੰ ਵਧਾਉਣ ਲਈ ਸਾਰੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਰਲ ਕੇ, ਇੱਥੇ ਨੇਟਿਵ ਪੀਪਲ ਨਾਲ ਰਲ ਕੇ, ਜੋ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਤੀਆਂ ਹੋਈਆਂ, ਇੱਕ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਾਂਝਾ ਮਹਾਜ ਬਣਾ ਕੇ ਤੁਰਨ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਆ। ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਹਿੰਦੁਸਤਾਨ ਦੀਆਂ ਜੇ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਬਹੁਤੀਆਂ ਕਰੀ ਜਾਣੀਆਂ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਫਾਇਦਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਣਾ। ਇੱਥੇ ਦੀਆਂ ਸਮੱਸਿਆਵਾਂ ਤੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਰਲ ਕੇ ਇੱਕ ਸਾਂਝਾ ਮਹਾਜ ਬਣਾਉਣ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਆ, ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਆਉਣੇ ਵਾਲੀਆਂ ਜਨਰੇਸ਼ਨਾਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਫਟਕਾਰਾ ਨਾ ਪਾ ਸਕਣ। ਅੰਤ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਕਰਦਾ ਤੇ ਗੁਰਪ੍ਰੀਤ ਨੂੰ ਤੋਂ ਮੈਂ ਇਹ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਆਸ ਰੱਖਦਾ ਕਿ ਗੁਰਪ੍ਰੀਤ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਇਹ ਆਰਟੀਕਲ ਵੀ ਲਿਖਦਾ, ਰੇਡੀਓ ਤੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦਿੰਦਾ, ਸੈਕੂਲਰਿਜ਼ਮ ਨੂੰ ਬੜਾਵਾ ਦਿੰਦਾ, ਐਕਟਿਵਿਜ਼ਮ ਨੂੰ ਬੜਾਵਾ ਦਿੰਦਾ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਤੇ ਹੋਰ ਕਰਦਾ ਹੋਇਆ ਗਾਹਾਂ ਚੱਲੂਗਾ। ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਗਦਰ ਸ਼ਤਾਬਦੀ ਅੱਜ ਮਨਾ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ, ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਹਦਾ ਆਪਣਾ ਹਿੱਸਾ ਆ, ਉਹ ਇੱਕ ਬਹੁਤ ਵਧੀਆ ਆ। ਅਸੀਂ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਧ ਹੋਰ ਹਿੱਸਾ ਪਾਵੇ। ਧੰਨਵਾਦ।
Thank you so much, Sangha Saab, for all your kind words and strong words as well too. The idea of an apology, it'll come up now as the commemoration for the Kamagadamu and its 100th anniversary keeps coming. What does a real apology mean? And it has to be internalized, and it has to have some long-lasting effects that reverses policies that the current government has that perpetuates the same racism and the same discrimination that the Kamagadamu faced. We have with us a great deal of activists and scholars, and Gurpreet Singh Ji has asked me to invite upon the stage a really prominent scholar, Joanna Ogden, who's joined us here. Joanna has done some great work in tracing the history of the Ghadar Party in Oregon, in Portland, Oregon, and she's done some groundbreaking work in that regard. Joanna Ogden.
So I just drove up today from Oregon, and I didn't get here in time to hear all the panelists, but I'm sure many thanks are in order for what you contributed, and I'm sorry to have missed it. And yes, I have been involved in documenting what's been a lost history about the Ghadar Party in Oregon and the Punjabi community largely along the Columbia River. And with Gurpreet, it's rooted in a history of a white settler regime in America, just like in Canada. It's rooted in the history of the continuing policies that shape our narratives about who we are as a region, as a country. It shapes the policies about our outlook about migrants and immigrants and who is a part of that narrative. And that's why I think this story is so important to keep alive. But the other part that I think is important about the history of the Ghadar Party is it also is the importance of radicalism, because something new happened in those circles. It was the coming together of people in a different kind of way, different people than normally came together, and with a different vision about the future. And I think that is what is so relevant about not just thinking about how this history continues to shape us today, but how the actions of people stepping outside of what was considered normal and proper, and they tried to bring in something new, and that is a highly relevant message for today. So congratulations on the new book, congratulations to contributing to this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanna, for all your hard work. And Joanna, is there a book coming out soon? Yes, October 4th and 5th in Portland, there's in Oregon.
In Astoria, Oregon, is that what I've contributed to is that the Gutter Party crystallized as an organization in Astoria, Oregon. The city is issued a proclamation in honor of the Gutter Party and is hosting a celebration of its roots in the city. So October 4th and 5th in Astoria, Oregon.
Thank you. Great job, Joanna. So for those of you who didn't hear, on October 4th and 5th, the city of Astoria, Oregon is celebrating their Gadar history and the Gadar community, which started in the Finnish Community Center.
Yes.
Yeah, so again, these intercultural histories keep coming up and keep showing how we can have examples for the future of how to work together. Maninder Singh Gill from Radio India, I saw him here earlier. Don't know if he's outside? Okay. So before he comes, I know we have a list of speakers who we want to get through, so we'll jump ahead to actually Kashmir Taliwal. Kashmir ji is, I don't see him here either. Gurinder Singh Dhaliwal, broadcaster and journalist. His family has been, hello ji. His family has been, sorry, not his family, he's been instrumental. Sorry ji, 1 second. Let me introduce you properly. A great man. He's done a great job as a broadcaster, and a journalist, but at the same time was influential in creating moments of silence to recognize Mewa Singh and his martyrdom day. Now Gurpreet Singh ji. Thank you, Papi.
ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਸਮਝਦਾ ਕਿ ਨੌਜਵਾਨ ਮਿਸਟਰ ਗਿਰਨ ਦੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਜ਼ੋਰਦਾਰ ਤਾੜੀਆਂ ਜਿਹਨੇ ਇਤਿਹਾਸਿਕ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ, ਬਹੁਤ ਸ਼ਾਨਦਾਰ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖੋ ਕਿ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਪਹਿਲੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਦੇ ਥਾਂ ਦੀ ਨਿਸ਼ਾਨਦੇਹੀ ਕਰਨ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਨਾਲ ਉੱਥੇ ਪਲੈਕ ਲਵਾ ਕੇ ਸਤਿਕਾਰ ਦੇਣਾ, ਮੇਵਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੇ ਸਬੰਧ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਫਾਂਸੀ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਗਈ, ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀ ਹੋਈ, ਉਸ ਜਗ੍ਹਾ ਦੀ ਨਿਸ਼ਾਨਦੇਹੀ ਕਰਨੀ ਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਨਾਲ ਭਾਈ ਭਾਗ ਸਿੰਘ ਉਸ ਘਰ ਦੀ ਨਿਸ਼ਾਨਦੇਹੀ ਕਰਨੀ। ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੇ ਕੰਮ ਇਸ ਨੌਜਵਾਨ ਨੇ ਇਹਦੇ ਮਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜ਼ਿਹਨ 'ਚ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਇਸ ਨੂੰ ਸ਼ਾਬਾਸ਼ ਦੇਣੀ ਬਣਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕੰਮ ਇਹ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ ਇਹ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਦਾ ਸੁਨਹਿਰੀ ਪੰਨਾ ਅੰਕਿਤ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ। ਮੇਰੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਇਹ ਗਿਰਨ ਨੇ ਜੋ ਕਿਹਾ, ਦਰਅਸਲ ਗੱਲ ਇਹ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਮੀਡੀਆ 'ਚ ਬੈਠਿਆਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੇ ਸਮੇਂ 'ਤੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਆਉਂਦੀਆਂ। ਪਿਛਲੇ 10-15 ਸਾਲਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਇਹ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਮੇਵਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਦਾ, ਉਸ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਕਾਫੀ ਪੜ੍ਹਨ ਅਤੇ ਜਾਣਨ ਨੂੰ ਮਿਲਿਆ। ਗਦਰ ਲਹਿਰ ਦੀ ਸ਼ਤਾਬਦੀ ਦਾ ਇਹ ਵਰ੍ਹਾ, 100 ਸਾਲ ਦੇ ਇਸ ਵਰ੍ਹੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਗਦਰ ਲਹਿਰ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਸਮਰਪਿਤ ਕਰਕੇ ਇੱਕ ਮਹਾਨ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਦੀ ਕੁਰਬਾਨੀ ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ, ਅਗਲੀ ਪੀੜ੍ਹੀ ਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਣਾ ਬਣਦਾ ਹੈ। ਗੁਰਪ੍ਰੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੇ ਉਸ ਵਰ੍ਹੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਲਿਖ ਕੇ ਇੱਕ ਇਤਿਹਾਸਕ ਕਾਰਜ ਕੀਤਾ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਬੜਾ ਸ਼ਲਾਘਾਯੋਗ ਹੈ। ਰੀਜ਼ਨ ਉਸ ਦਾ ਇਹ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਚਿਰ ਤੋਂ ਸ਼ਹੀਦਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ। ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਆਜ਼ਮ ਭਗਤ ਸਿੰਘ, ਊਧਮ ਸਿੰਘ, ਮਹਾਨ ਯੋਧਿਆਂ ਨੇ, ਮਦਨ ਲਾਲ ਢੀਂਗਰਾ, ਬੜੀਆਂ ਵੱਡੀਆਂ ਕੁਰਬਾਨੀਆਂ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ, ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੇ ਵਿਸ਼ਵ ਵਿਖਿਆਤ ਨੇ, ਬੜੇ ਮਸ਼ਹੂਰ ਨੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਦੇਣ ਸਾਰੇ ਪਾਸੇ ਜਾਣੀ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ। ਪਰ ਯਕੀਨ ਮੰਨੋ ਕਿ ਉਸ ਲੜੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੀ ਧਰਤੀ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਪਹਿਲਾ ਵਿਅਕਤੀ ਜਿਸ ਨੇ ਸਥਾਪਤੀ ਦੇ ਖਿਲਾਫ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਕਰਕੇ, ਨਿੱਜੀ ਦੁਸ਼ਮਣੀ ਨਹੀਂ, ਕਿਸੇ ਰੰਗ ਨਸਲ ਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ, ਕਿਸੇ ਧਰਮ ਮਜ਼ਹਬ ਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ, ਕਿਸੇ ਹੋਰ ਵਿਰੋਧ ਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ, ਮਨੁੱਖੀ ਹੱਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਹਥਿਆਰ ਚੱਕਿਆ ਅਤੇ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀ ਪਾਈ, ਉਹ ਮੇਵਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਬਾਰੇ ਇੱਕ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਲਿਖਣੀ ਇਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡੀ ਪ੍ਰਾਪਤੀ ਹੈ। ਮੇਰੇ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਯਾਨੀ ਕੇਸਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਗੁਰਾਂ ਦਾ ਨਾਵਲ ਹੈ। ਮੈਂ ਦਰਅਸਲ ਦੇਖ ਰਿਹਾ ਸੀ 2-4 ਗੱਲਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਇਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਸੰਦਰਭ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵਿਚਾਰਨੀਆਂ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਬਣਦੀਆਂ। ਇੱਕ ਤਾਂ ਇਹ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਮੇਵਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੂੰ ਹੌਪਕਿੰਸਨ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਉਂ ਮਾਰਨਾ ਪਿਆ, ਇਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡਾ ਸਵਾਲ ਸੀ। ਆਮ ਕਰਕੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਅਜੇ ਵੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕ੍ਰਿਮੀਨਲ ਜਾਂ ਕਾਤਲ ਦੇ ਤੌਰ 'ਤੇ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਤੇ ਸੱਚ ਜਾਣੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੇ ਲੋਕ ਤਾਂ ਉਹ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਨੂੰ ਮੂੰਹ 'ਤੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਲਿਆਉਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ, ਗੱਲਾਂ ਵੱਡੀਆਂ ਵੱਡੀਆਂ ਕਰਨਗੇ, ਪਰ ਮੇਵਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੇ ਇਸ ਕੰਮ ਨੂੰ ਉਹ ਕਦੇ ਵੀ ਮਾਨਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਤੇ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਸੇ ਨਾ ਕਿਸੇ ਢੰਗ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਸ ਢੰਗ ਨਾਲ ਪੇਸ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਇੱਕ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਗੁਨਾਹ ਹੀ ਸੀ, ਜਦ ਕਿ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ। ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪੰਨਾ ਗਲਤ ਹੈ, ਇਸ ਨੂੰ ਠੀਕ ਕਰਾਉਣਾ ਤੇ ਇਸ ਲਈ ਕਦਮ ਚੁੱਕਣਾ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਅੱਜ ਦੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਕੋਈ ਨਾ ਕੋਈ ਵਚਨਬੱਧਤਾ ਹੋਣੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਹੈ। ਅਸੀਂ ਅਹਿਦ ਲਈਏ ਕਿ ਉਸ ਮੇਵਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਬਾਰੇ ਜੋ ਗਲਤ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਜਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਤੱਕ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਗਿਆ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਠੀਕ ਕਰਾਈਏ ਤੇ ਪਤਾ ਲੱਗੇ। ਮੈਨੂੰ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ UBC ਦੇ ਇਸ ਪੇਪਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਚਾਹੇ ਉਹ 3000 ਸ਼ਬਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਕਹੀ ਗਈ ਹੈ, ਪਰ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡਾ ਇੱਕ ਚੈਪਟਰ ਖੋਲ੍ਹਿਆ ਜਿਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਵਿਚਾਰ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਹੈ। ਦੂਸਰੀ ਗੱਲ, ਮੇਵਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੀ ਪ੍ਰੇਰਨਾ ਜੋ ਸਨ ਉਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਯੋਧੇ ਸਨ, ਚਾਹੇ ਉਹ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਤੇ ਵਿਰਸੇ ਦੇ ਸਨ, ਚਾਹੇ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੀ ਧਰਤੀ ਤੇ ਆ ਕੇ ਉਸ ਨੇ ਨਸਲਵਾਦੀ ਨੀਤੀਆਂ ਦਾ ਸਾਹਮਣਾ ਕੀਤਾ, ਤੇ ਚਾਹੇ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਤੋਂ ਪ੍ਰੇਰਨਾ ਮਿਲੀ ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਉਹ ਬਕਾਇਦਾ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਸਮਰਪਿਤ ਅਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਡੈਡੀਕੇਟਡ ਗੁਰਸਿੱਖ ਦੇ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਬਿਆਨ ਕਰਦਾ ਹੈ। ਦਰਅਸਲ ਇੱਥੇ ਇੱਕ ਹੋਰ ਬੜੀ ਵਧੀਆ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ, ਮੇਵਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਇੱਕ ਪੂਰਕ ਹੈ ਉਸ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਗਦਰ ਦਾ ਸਹੀ ਮੁਲਾਂਕਣ ਕਰ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ। ਗਦਰ ਦੇ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਬਾਰੇ ਇੱਕ ਧਿਰ ਇਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਗਦਰੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਸੇ ਧਰਮ ਤੇ ਵਿਸ਼ਵਾਸ ਚੋਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਕੱਢ ਕੇ ਕੇਵਲ ਤੇ ਕੇਵਲ ਇਹ ਹੀ ਕਹੋ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਕਦੇ ਇਸ ਤੋਂ ਪ੍ਰੇਰਨਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ। ਇੱਕ ਧਿਰ ਇਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਗਦਰ ਕੇਵਲ ਤੇ ਕੇਵਲ ਇੱਕ ਖਾਸ ਧਰਮ ਜਾਂ ਆਪੋ ਆਪਣੇ ਫਿਰਕੇ ਤੋਂ ਪ੍ਰਭਾਵਿਤ ਸਨ। ਮੇਵਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੀ ਕੁਰਬਾਨੀ ਇਸ ਗੱਲ ਦੀ ਪੂਰਕ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਪ੍ਰੇਰਨਾ ਆਪਣੇ ਪੁਰਾਤਨ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਤੋਂ ਮਿਲੀ, ਆਪਣੇ ਮਹਾਨ ਵਿਰਸੇ ਤੋਂ ਮਿਲੀ, ਤੇ ਉਸਨੇ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਲਾਗੂ ਮਨੁੱਖੀ ਹੱਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਕੀਤਾ, ਤੇ ਇਸ ਤੋਂ ਵਧੀਆ ਉਦਾਹਰਨ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ 'ਚ ਹੋਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਮਿਲ ਸਕਦੀ। ਉਸੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਮੇਵਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਜਦੋਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ 27 ਤੇ 28 ਤਰੀਕ ਨੂੰ ਬੂਝਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੀ ਮਹਾਨ ਉਹ ਗਦਰੀ ਯੋਧੇ ਜਾਂ ਗਦਰੀ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਨਕਸਲਾਈਟ ਮੂਵਮੈਂਟ ਦੇ ਉਹ ਯੋਧੇ ਦੀ ਇਹ ਬਰਸੀ ਵੀ ਹੈ, ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀ ਦਿਨ ਵੀ ਹੈ। ਦਰਅਸਲ ਇਹ ਦਿਨ ਅੱਜ ਜਦੋਂ ਇਹ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਰਿਲੀਜ਼ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਅਹਿਮੀਅਤ ਰੱਖਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਗਦਰ ਦੇ ਮਹਾਨ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਦੇ 100 ਵਰ੍ਹੇ ਮਨਾਉਣ ਦੇ ਬਾਵਜੂਦ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਮਹਿਸੂਸ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਸੁਪਨੇ ਪੂਰੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਏ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸੁਪਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਗਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਲਏ ਸੀ। ਅੱਜ ਜੋ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਜੇ ਸੋਹਣ ਸਿੰਘ ਭਕਨਾ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ ਜਾਂ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਦੇ ਹੋਰ ਪੰਨਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ, ਮੈਨੂੰ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਦੇ ਪੰਨੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਅਹਿਸਾਸ ਦਿਵਾਉਂਦੇ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਕੁਰਬਾਨੀਆਂ ਜਿਸ ਮਕਸਦ ਲਈ ਦਿੱਤੀਆਂ ਉਹ ਕੁਰਬਾਨੀਆਂ ਦਾ ਅਜੇ ਸਫ਼ਰ ਅਧੂਰਾ ਹੈ। ਕਿਉਂ ਅਧੂਰਾ, ਇਹ ਅਸੀਂ ਵਿਚਾਰ ਕਰਨੀ ਹੈ। ਕਿਉਂ ਬਾਬਾ ਸੋਹਣ ਸਿੰਘ ਭਕਨਾ ਇਹ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਮੇਰੇ ਜੇ ਅੰਗਰੇਜ਼ ਵੀ ਪਿੱਠ 'ਚ ਕੁੱਬ ਨਹੀਂ ਪਾ ਸਕਿਆ ਤੇ ਮੇਰੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਹਕੂਮਤ ਨੇ ਪਾ ਦਿੱਤਾ। ਕਿਉਂ ਸਰਦਾਰ ਬੂਝਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਵਰਗੇ ਬਜ਼ੁਰਗ ਨੂੰ, ਉਸ ਬਜ਼ੁਰਗ ਨੂੰ ਜਿਸ ਦੀ ਸਾਰੀ ਉਮਰ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਤੇ ਆਜ਼ਾਦੀ ਦੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਕੁਰਬਾਨ ਹੋ ਗਈ, ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਅਖੀਰ ਨੂੰ ਗੋਲੀਆਂ ਮਿਲਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ। ਕਿਉਂ ਮਨੁੱਖੀ ਹੱਕਾਂ ਦਾ ਘਾਣ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ, ਕਿਉਂ ਇਹ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਚੱਲਦਾ ਹੈ, ਇਸ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਮੁਲਾਂਕਣ ਕਰਨਾ ਵੀ ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਇਸ ਪੁਸਤਕ ਰਿਲੀਜ਼ ਸਮਾਰੋਹ ਦਾ ਹਿੱਸਾ ਹੈ। ਸਮੁੱਚੇ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਇਸ ਗੱਲ ਦੀ ਮੁਬਾਰਕਬਾਦ ਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਜ਼ਿੰਮੇਵਾਰੀ ਦਾ ਅਹਿਸਾਸ ਬਣਦਾ ਹੈ, ਉੱਥੇ ਮੈਂ ਸਮਝਦਾ ਕਿ ਮੇਵਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੇ 11 ਜਨਵਰੀ 1915 ਦੇ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀ ਦਿਨ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਘੜੀਆਂ ਜਦੋਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ, ਉਸ ਮੌਕੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਇੱਕ ਪਿਰਤ ਦੇ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਕੁਝ ਪਲਾਂ ਤੇ ਛਿਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਆਤਮ ਮੁਲਾਂਕਣ ਤੇ ਵਿਸ਼ਲੇਸ਼ਣ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਕੁਝ ਪਲਾਂ ਲਈ ਰੁਕ ਕੇ ਕਿ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕੀ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ, ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਸ ਮਰਹਲੇ ਤੇ ਖੜੇ ਹਾਂ, ਕਿੱਥੇ ਪਹੁੰਚਣਾ। ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਇੱਕ ਗਿਆਨੀ ਕੇਸਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਹੁਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਇਸ ਨਾਵਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਉਸ ਆਖਰੀ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਨੂੰ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਾਂਝਾ ਕਰਕੇ ਖਿਮਾ ਮੰਗਾਂਗਾ, ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੇਵਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੇ ਉਹ ਬੋਲ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਅੱਜ ਹਰ ਇੱਕ ਲਈ ਸਾਡੇ ਲਈ ਪ੍ਰੇਰਨਾ ਸਰੋਤ ਨੇ। ਕੀ ਉਹ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ? ਅਕਤੂਬਰ 29 ਦੇ ਦਿਨ ਸੰਨ 1914, ਮੇਰਾ ਨਾਮ ਮੇਵਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਹੈ, ਮੈਂ ਹੌਪਕਿੰਸਨ ਨੂੰ ਮਾਰਿਆ ਹੈ, ਮੈਂ ਇੱਕ ਸ਼ੁਭ ਮੰਤਵ ਲਈ ਇਹ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੈ, ਮੈਂ ਰੱਬ ਵਿੱਚ ਭਰੋਸਾ ਰੱਖਣ ਵਾਲਾ ਬੰਦਾ ਹਾਂ, ਮੈਂ ਆਪਣਾ ਨਿਤਨੇਮ ਤੇ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਸਿਰ ਕਰਦਾ ਹਾਂ, ਮੈਂ ਰੱਬ ਦੇ ਭੈ ਵਾਲਾ ਬੰਦਾ ਹਾਂ। ਮੈਨੂੰ ਅਜਿਹੇ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੱਭ ਰਹੇ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਰਾਹੀਂ ਮੈਂ ਦੁੱਖ ਤੇ ਕਸ਼ਟ ਦੱਸ ਸਕਾਂ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਵੈਨਕੂਵਰ ਰਹਿੰਦਿਆਂ ਗੁਜ਼ਰਨਾ ਪਿਆ। ਅਸੀਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਜਦੋਂ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਡਾ ਮੁੱਖ ਮੰਤਵ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਪਰਮਾਤਮਾ ਦੀ ਹਾਜ਼ਰੀ 'ਚ ਜੁੜੀਏ ਤੇ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਕਰੀਏ, ਪਰ ਸਰਕਾਰੀ ਬੰਦੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਤਬਾਹ ਕਰ ਦੇਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ। ਉਹ ਪਿਸਤੌਲਾਂ ਭਰ ਕੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਪਹੁੰਚਦੇ ਨੇ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਡਰਾਉਂਦੇ ਨੇ, ਧਮਕਾਉਂਦੇ ਨੇ, ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਅਰਦਾਸਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਭੰਗ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਦੀ ਪਵਿੱਤਰਤਾ ਭੰਗ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ। ਉਸ ਦਿਨ ਬੇਲੇ ਨੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਗੋਲੀ ਚਲਾਈ। ਉਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਪੁਲਿਸ ਨੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਅਜਾਈਂ ਫੜ ਲਿਆ ਤੇ ਪੁੱਛਿਆ ਕਿ ਕੀ ਤੂੰ ਗੋਲੀ ਚਲਾਈ ਹੈ? ਜਦ ਇਸ ਦਾ ਉੱਤਰ ਮੈਂ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਤਾਂ ਇਸ ਦੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਅੱਜ ਮੈਂ ਇਹ ਜਵਾਬ ਤਲਬੀ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਸਾਂ ਜਦੋਂ ਬੇਲੇ ਨੇ ਗੋਲੀ ਚਲਾਈ। ਬੇਲੇ ਦੀ ਗੋਲੀ ਦਾ ਸ਼ਿਕਾਰ ਹੋਏ ਭਾਗ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੀ ਪਤਨੀ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ, ਉਸ ਦੇ 2 ਨਿੱਕੇ ਨਿੱਕੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਨੇ। ਮੈਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ 2 ਯਤੀਮ ਵੋਟਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਤੱਕ ਕੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਅੰਦਰ ਬਲਦੀ ਅੱਗ ਨੂੰ ਵੇਖ ਰਿਹਾ ਹਾਂ। ਦਰਅਸਲ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਉਹਨੇ ਕਹੀ ਕਿ ਜੇ ਕੱਲ ਕਿਤੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਚਰਚ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਦੇ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹਾ ਵਾਕਿਆ ਹੋਵੇ ਤਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੀ ਕਰੋ, ਇਸ ਦਾ ਜਵਾਬ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ। ਇਹ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਮੇਵਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੇ ਕਥਨ ਸਾਡੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਸਵਾਲ ਉਠਾਉਂਦੇ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਸ਼ਹਾਦਤ ਭਾਈ ਭਾਗ ਸਿੰਘ, ਭਾਈ ਬਤਨ ਸਿੰਘ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੇ ਕੀਤੇ ਹਮਲੇ ਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਇਤਿਹਾਸਕ ਪ੍ਰਸੰਗ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋਈ, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਿ ਉਸ ਪੱਧਰ ਤੇ ਉਜਾਗਰ ਕਰਨੀ ਬਣਦੀ ਹੈ। ਅੱਜ ਸਾਡੇ ਜਿੱਡੇ ਵੱਡੇ ਵੱਡੇ ਸਫਾਰਤਖਾਨੇ ਨੇ, ਦਫ਼ਤਰ ਨੇ, ਆਫਿਸਿਸ ਨੇ, मैं समझना कि शहीद मेवा सिंह की तस्वीर हर थां ते लगनी चाहिए है। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
Gurvinder Singh ji, thank you so much for your wonderful words, and thank you for sharing Mewa Singh ji's some of his final words as well too. We have them in the archive, but they're in English. Reclaiming it in Punjabi, I think, is a very strong testament to giving power to his words again. I don't know if I should share this or not. A part of my job sometimes is to become a book hunter. And I was able to find this old book written by a Christian missionary who was sent to Vancouver in 1914 to convert Sikhs to Christianity. And when Mewa Singh was in jail, this Christian missionary was sent there to meet Mewa Singh. And Mewa Singh said to him in this very short passage that I have some family and I have some land and I have a mother who need to be taken care of. Could you please let the community know to help take care of them? And in that moment, you get a sense of the type of person that Mewa Singh was. Here he was about to be executed. He wasn't hoping to get any leniency for himself. He was hoping to take care of his family and for the people who he cared about. And I think that's the Mewa Singh that we're celebrating here today and who needs to be remembered. This person who was driven by a deep and sincere passion. Mr. Jadampal Gill from PICS is here with us today. If you can come up and say a few words, please.
I would say, I listened to many speakers, I express my solidarity with them. And congratulate to our friend for doing an excellent job. I think its time is over now. I don't want to prolong it. I just say I'm very happy to see this crowd because we are same kind of people, same kind of thinking, and all these speakers, interested me. And I was looking forward to read the book. Let's see. Thank you very much.
Thank you, We have a couple more speakers to go. This is the 100th anniversary of the Gadar movement and the birth of the Gadar party. Next year, of course, is the 100th anniversary of the Kamagatamru. And we have Mr. Tur here with us today. Tur Sahib, would you mind coming up and saying a few words on this occasion? Thank you,
Thank you. Celia, thank you for coming here. You are a wonderful speaker, and I have learned myself a little more about First Nations. Thank you for that. Was a wonderful speech. And we, the descendants of Kamagatamru passengers, stand with you. My grandfather was in that ship, Kamagatamru, 1914. Thank you. मैं कहना चाहूँगा कि this is a wonderful work. Gurpreet has been doing a great job. थोड़ा बहुत धन्यवाद. This is the third or fourth book in 1 year. That's a lot of hard work. And I don't know how you do it. I can't do it. And मैं वैसे बड़े वधिया स्पीकर स्कॉलर्स साडी कम्युनिटी ਦੇ ਜਾਣੇ ਪਛਾਣੇ ਲੋਕ ਇੱਥੇ ਆਏ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਬੜੇ ਵਧੀਆ ਸਪੀਚ ਕੀਤੀ ਮੈਂ ਸਿਰਫ ਇਹੀ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਚਾਹੂੰਗਾ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਤਾਬਾਂ ਵੀ ਲਿਖਦੇ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਯਾਦ ਵੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਪਰ ਜੋ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਪੂਰਨੇ ਸੀ ਜੋ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਖਿਆਲ ਸੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਉਹਦੇ ਤੇ ਥੋੜਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਜ਼ੋਰ ਦੇਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਵੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਕੀ ਸੋਚ ਸੀ ਹੁਣ ਯਾਦ ਰੱਖੋ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲੋਂ ਵੋਟਾਂ ਦਾ ਹੱਕ ਖੋਇਆ ਗਿਆ ਕੌਮਾਗਾਟਾਮਾਰੂ ਨੂੰ ਵਾਪਸ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਭਾਈ ਭਾਗ ਸਿੰਘ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਮੇਵਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਔਰ ਹੋਰ ਬਹੁਤ ਗਦਰੀ ਯੋਧੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਹੋਏ ਨੇ ਕੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਜੋ ਸੋਚ ਸੀ ਉਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਅੱਜ ਲੜ ਰਹੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਨੂੰ ਪਹਿਲੀ ਗੱਲ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਹੋਸਟ ਆ ਉਹ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਨੂੰ ਤਿੰਨ ਚਾਰ ਦਿਨ ਹਫ਼ਤੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਚੰਗੀਆਂ ਗਾਲਾਂ ਕੱਢਦੇ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਕਾਨੂੰਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿਰੁੱਧ ਚੱਲ ਰਿਹਾ। ਫਿਰ ਜਦੋਂ ਉਹ ਆਉਂਦਾ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਹੋਸਟ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਬੋਲਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ, ਇੱਕ ਲਫ਼ਜ਼ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਕੁਝ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ। ਹਾਂਜੀ ਹਾਂਜੀ ਵਧੀਆ ਜੋਬ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ ਜੀ, ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਜੀ, ਕੋਈ ਉਹਨੂੰ। ਪਰ ਜੇ ਕੋਈ ਗੁਰਪ੍ਰੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਵਰਗੇ ਜਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਦੋ ਹੋਰ ਹੋਸਟ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ ਜੋ ਮੈਂ ਸੁਣਿਆ, ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਜਦੋਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਸਵਾਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ ਤਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਉਹ ਜਲਦੀ ਖਹਿੜਾ ਛਡਾ ਲੈਂਦਾ। ਪਰ ਵੇਖਣ ਵਾਲੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਵਾਕਈ ਹੋਸਟ ਨੇ, ਜਦੋਂ ਉਹ ਜਾਣ ਦੀ ਹਜੇ ਉਹਨੇ ਸਟੈਪ ਨਹੀਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ, ਕਾਰ 'ਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਬੈਠਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ, ਉਹਦੇ ਮਗਰੇ ਫਿਰ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਮਾੜਾ ਕਰਨਾ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕਰ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ। ਸੋ ਵਾਈ ਡੋਂਟ ਯੂ ਆਸਕ ਥੀਸ ਕੁਐਸਚਨਸ ਵਾਈਲ ਹੀ ਇਜ਼ ਦੇਅਰ, ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਹੁਣ ਲੱਖਾਂ ਬੰਦੇ ਤਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਸਵਾਲ ਪੁੱਛ ਸਕਦੇ, ਪਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਲੱਖਾਂ ਬੰਦਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਆਵਾਜ਼ ਤਾਂ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਨਾ, ਥੋੜੀ ਆਵਾਜ਼ ਤੋਂ ਫਿਰ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਭੱਜਦਾ ਨਜ਼ਰ ਆਉਂਦਾ। ਮੈਂ ਗੁਰਪ੍ਰੀਤ ਦਾ ਇੱਕ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਸੁਣਿਆ ਸੀ, ਇੱਕ ਹੋਰ ਲੜਕੀ ਆ ਹੋਸਟ, ਉਹਨੇ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਚੰਗਾ ਜਦੋਂ ਸਵਾਲ ਹਾਰਡ ਕੁਐਸਚਨ ਕੀਤੇ, ਕੁਐਸਚਨ ਹੀ ਕਰਨੇ, ਡਾਂਗ ਤਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਮਾਰਨੀ, ਜਦੋਂ ਕੁਐਸਚਨ ਕੀਤੇ ਤਾਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਫਿਰ ਭੱਜਣ ਨੂੰ ਰਾਹ ਨਾ ਮਿਲੇ। ਆਈ ਥਿੰਕ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਵਾਲ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਹੋਸਟ ਨੂੰ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਕਰਨੇ ਚਾਹੀਦੇ ਆ। ਔਰ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਕਾਲਜ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਹੁਣ ਕਾਨੂੰਨ ਆ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਹ ਸਾਡੇ ਹੀ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੇ, ਸਾਊਥ ਏਸ਼ੀਅਨ ਦੇ ਜਾਂ ਚਾਈਨੀਜ਼ ਦੇ ਹੀ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿਰੁੱਧ ਕਾਨੂੰਨ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਬਣਾਏ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਨੇ ਬੜੇ ਸੋਚੇ ਸਮਝੇ ਢੰਗ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ। ਪਰ ਆਪਾਂ ਕੀ ਉਹ ਭਾਈ ਮੇਵਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੀ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਜਾਂ ਭਾਈ ਭਾਗ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੀ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਜਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਬਜ਼ੁਰਗਾਂ ਦੀ ਗਦਰੀ ਬਾਬਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਆ? ਨੋ। ਹੁਣ ਤਾਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਜਦੋਂ ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰੀ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਔਰ ਜਿਨੀ ਸਿਮਸ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰੀ ਮੈਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਦੇਖਿਆ, ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਲੀਡਰ ਆ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਦੇ ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਜੱਫੀ ਪਾਉਂਦੇ ਨੇ, ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਕਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ। ਮੇਰਾ ਖਿਆਲ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਾਂ ਉਹ ਸੋਚਦੇ ਹੋਣਾ ਵੀ ਜੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਕੁਝ ਕਿਹਾ ਤਾਂ ਇਹਨੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਗ੍ਰਾਂਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਦੇਣੀ, ਜੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਾਡੀ ਗ੍ਰਾਂਟ ਤੱਕ ਹੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਸੋਚ ਆ ਤਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਮੇਰਾ ਖਿਆਲ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਹਜੇ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਨਾ ਪਊਗਾ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਸਿੱਖਣਾ ਪਊਗਾ, ਫਿਰ ਹੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਯਾਦ ਕੀਤਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਫਾਇਦਾ। ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਇੱਥੇ ਗੱਲ ਦੱਸਣੀ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਪਰਿਵਾਰਾਂ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਾਮਾ ਕਾਟਾ ਮਾਰਦੇ, ਜਦੋਂ ਮਾਫੀ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਚੱਲਦੀ ਸੀ, ਇੱਕੋ ਇੱਕ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਸੀ, ਅਸੀਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ੋਰ ਲਾਇਆ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਹੋਰ ਕੋਈ ਮੰਗ ਨਾ ਕਰੋ, ਕੋਈ ਗ੍ਰਾਂਟ ਦੀ ਮੰਗ ਨਾ ਕਰੋ, ਸਿਰਫ ਅਪੋਲੋਜੀ ਦੀ ਕਰੋ। ਪਰ ਆਪੋ ਆਪਣੀ ਪੈ ਗਈ, ਉਹ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਹੀ ਹੈ ਜੋ ਕੁਛ ਹੋਇਆ। ਔਰ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਅਪੋਲੋਜੀ ਆ ਉਹ ਚਾਈਨੀਜ਼ ਤੋਂ ਐਂਡ ਫਸਟ ਨੇਸ਼ਨ ਤੇ ਬਾਕੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਜੈਪਨੀਜ਼ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ, Prime Minister did apologize in the Parliament. When it came our turn, he said Bear Creek Park is good enough. And so the fight is still on. We would like to have the apology in the Parliament in a respectful way. But the apology is not enough, as you have said. Apology can be given, and then the same history is being repeated. I think it's better to correct it in the future so it won't happen again. Then apologize. Then apology means something. Thank you very much. Gurpreet, you have done a good job. Thank you. Oh, I know Naveen for a few years now. He has done a wonderful work, and especially on the website. Thank you.
Thank you so much. One of our final speakers before Gurpreet Singh will wrap up the night is Ginny Sims. I'd like to call her to the stage to say a few words, please.
I want to bring us to today. Today it is with a great deal of pride we congratulate Gurpreet for releasing his book on Mewa Singh, and we recognize the contributions of the Gaddar movement. I was in England recently, and I had an opportunity there to meet with activists, young and old, who are struggling to keep this movement alive. And I say struggling. We have gained a lot in this country from the 1900s. We've gained money, we've gained positions, we've got people in professions. And we celebrate. We have the Gadri Babiyan da Mela aa jana aunde hafte nu, fir aapa salana manauna hai, aapa bahut functions karde hain. But my challenge to the community is, what are you doing today about the wrongs that are being done, not just against the South Asian community, but also the social injustice against the Aboriginal people, the people who are poor, and all the others who are disadvantaged. There is an intersection between the oppressed, and there is a pedagogy of oppression. And instead of working together, we all build little silos, and become very protective of our silos and want to just stay in our silos and to do the fight. Let me tell you, we have to learn something from the right. And that is, the silos have to be broken, we have to hold hands, and we have to fight all the oppressions together. What is happening in immigration today is absolutely outrageous. People here marrying somebody from India or the Philippines or China are basically being asked to have a trial marriage for 2 years. Just think about that for a second, because the person who comes in is not going to have permanent residency, full permanent residency for 2 years. Families, it's almost impossible to sponsor anybody for family reunification. Only 5,000 applications for all of Canada will be taken in 1 year. Income increased by 30%. Sponsorship for 20 years. How is this any different than what the struggles were back in the 1900s? If this had happened in the 1970s or 80s, I would say that you would have filled up busloads and filled the legislature, filled the House of Commons. But today, I hate to say this, and please forgive me if I'm a bit too harsh, we find it far more comfortable to celebrate Gadri Babbe and to talk about the past because it's far away. And we don't find it in us to take the steps we need to take, every one of us, to fight what's happening today. I get very emotional when I hear about the contributions of my parents, and I say my parents because they struggled too, and of the Gadri Babas, and going way back. And we're very, very proud of that, and that's our history, and we need to cherish our history and preserve it. But let's make sure that we're not so busy talking about the past that in future generations, the only stories we have to tell are the great things done by the Gadri Babas. And when our children turn around and say to you, your grandchildren, great-grandchildren, what were you doing when all these attacks were happening right now? And if I was the great-grandchildren, I would say, shame on you if you do not fight for social justice, for the First Nations people, for our environment, against the immigration policies that are regressive and punitive and undervalue families. So my plea with you today is Gurpreet is one of my heroes. We fight sometimes, like any brother and sister does, yeah? And because he's not scared to raise those issues. And I would ask each and every one of you when you go home tonight to say, what part am I playing in making sure that there is social justice, not just for me, but for all? It's very easy to fight to protect yourself. When you're attacked, I see people who praise Jason Kenney when he comes here, come to my office when they've got something happening in their family in immigration. It's easy to fight for yourself, but what I'm saying to you is, it's far more rewarding when you fight for the collective good. And one thing we should learn from the Gadar movement and from our ancestors is, they understood community. They didn't fight for themselves. They sacrificed for others. And when they had 5 pennies, they gave up a penny or 2 in order to make sure people on that ship were fed. And today people are more about, I'm okay. So, सारियां तो माफ़ी मंगदी हैं जे मैं बड़ा कुछ ज़्यादा ही कह देता. I do apologize if I've overstepped my few words, but I think to honor Gurpreet's work is to say that the movement is alive. The struggle of the Gaddar has to continue because we have not achieved the nirvana and equality that they fought for so hard. So to truly honor the Gaddar movement is to fight for social justice today for each and every one of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ginny. Gurpreet ji has asked a few more speakers to say a few words. Harbhajan Gill. Hello ji, how are you doing? Harbhajan Gill from the Kamagaram Foundation. If you can say a few words, please.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. Thank you very much for making this a great event. And you know, about 5 years ago, we started working with First Nations and Chinese community, Japanese community, and labor movement at the time when 1907 riots happened. They actually admitted, you know, we were the one who wanted you guys out. And 5 years ago, we had an event, 100 years of celebration of, well, I shouldn't say celebration, it was an anniversary of Chinatown riots. And all these people coming out and sharing their thoughts, we made a group, Anniversaries of Change, Anniversary of 7, you know, what are we going to do and when we celebrate next 100 years. One of the things, Wade Grant from Musqueam and Larry Grant, you know, they said we would love to be part of 100 years anniversary of Kamangata Maru. And you know what? What we would really want to do is Canadian government at that time did not welcome you. But doesn't matter if there's an apology, doesn't matter what, when that 100-year anniversary comes, we need to find a way. We, Musqueam Band and Canadian people will welcome you. And we're still trying to find how we're going to do that. And we will have an event where we are hoping you're going to host and welcome those people who did not get their justice 100 years ago. मैं हुण एक दो चीज़ां पंजाबी दे विच कहना चाहना। देखो अज जिन्ने भी इत्थे असीं बैठे हैं, किन्ने क बंदे हैं? बहुत थोड़े हैं। जिन्ने भी बंदे असीं हैगे हैं, ये काम करना चाहुंदे आ भी की होया की नया, उन्हां नूं जस्टिस किस तरह मिले। जदों तक साडे होर लोकी जिहड़े मेले ही लाउंदे रहिंदे आ, मेलिਆਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ 40,000 ਬੰਦਾ भी इकट्ठा हो जाता, पर वो मेले का मतलब की आ? दूसरे दिन सब कुछ भुल जाते हैं। तुसी इत्थे तीयां दे मेले ला जाओ, किसी मैं कि एक बंदे नहीं कहता, कोई भी किसी ने सिंगर नूं सद लो, इत्थे 40,000 बंदा इकट्ठा हो जाना, 20,000 बंदा इकट्ठा हो जाना। पर जदों असीं कोई इस तरह का फंक्शन करते हैं जिन्हां दे नाल तुसीं अपने बच्चों नूं अवेयर करते हैं, बच्चों नूं सिखाते हैं भी साडे जिहड़े फोर फादर्स आ उन्हां नाल की बीती आ, जे तुसीं अपने आप नूं नहीं संभालते, साडे नाल भी यही हुण बीत रही है। तो इसी तरह जिहड़े इनजस्टिस 100 साल पहलां होए आ, ਉਹੀ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਰਹਿਣਗੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਤੱਕ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਘਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਨਿਕਲਦੇ, ਤਾਂ ਇਹ ਆਪਣੇ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਿਖਾਉਂਦੇ। ਮੈਂ ਇੱਕ ਲਾਸਟ ਵਰਡ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਹਾਂ, ਉਹ ਹੈ ਅਗਲੇ ਸਾਲ ਕੈਨਰਾ ਪੋਸਟ ਕਾਰਪੋਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਨੇ ਕਾਮਾਗਾਟਾ ਮਾਰੂ ਦੇ ਉੱਪਰ ਸਟੈਂਪ ਰਿਲੀਜ਼ ਕਰਨੇ ਦੀ ਮਨਜ਼ੂਰੀ ਦੇ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਹੈ। ਉਹ ਇੱਕ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੀ ਅਪੋਲੋਜੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਮਰਜ਼ੀ ਕਰ ਲਓ, ਹੋ ਗਈ ਜਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਗਈ, ਇੱਕ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੀ ਅਵੇਅਰਨੈਸ ਹੈ। ਜਦੋਂ ਤੱਕ ਦਿਲੋਂ ਅਪੋਲੋਜੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਗੌਰਮੈਂਟ ਦੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ, ਉਦੋਂ ਤੱਕ ਮੇਰਾ ਖਿਆਲ ਸਾਡਾ ਇਹ ਚੈਪਟਰ ਖੁੱਲ੍ਹਾ ਹੀ ਰਹਿਣਾ। ਅਸੀਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਭਈ ਮੰਗਣ ਜਾਂ ਨਾ ਮੰਗਣ, ਇੱਕ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਅਵੇਅਰਨੈਸ ਆ, ਇੱਕ ਸਟੈਂਪ 14 ਮਿਲੀਅਨ ਸਟੈਂਪ ਨਿਕਲਣਾ ਕਾਮਾਗਾਟਾ ਮਾਰੂ ਤੇ, ਇਹਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ 14 ਮਿਲੀਅਨ people of Canada will, at least when they get the stamp, they'll know or they want to find out what Kamagata Maru was. So that's what I call awareness. ਉਸ ਸਟੈਂਪ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮਗਰ ਗਵਰਨਮੈਂਟ ਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਹੱਥ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ। If you think it's the government of Canada who did that, they don't have anything to do with that. Yes, there are political powers who are on boards of Canada Post directors who approved it. Yes, government still had to say something to it. They could have rejected it, but it was Canada Post Corporation. So if we can get these corporations behind our causes, we can go ahead and we can achieve a lot. And I believe, you know, we have gone long way, and we're going to go furthermore. And only way to go furthermore, Gurpreet, one thing I believe in, I haven't read your book, I know when I read it, what Gurpreet does, he does it from his point of view, and he actually goes there to investigate. Example I want to give you is 100-year anniversary of 1907 riots in 2007. We went from Victory Square to Japanese school on Powell Street. About 400 people walked, everybody from different community. It was a shame for me to only have one person from our Indo-Canadian community walk beside me and report on that day, which was very important to our community, and that was Gurpreet and his wife. And I can never forget that. So if he can investigate and he can find a time to report in those kind of situations, I'm sure this book will be a very fine read and fine written book. Thank you very much, Gurpreet.
Thank you, Cecilia. Thank you, Harbhajan ji. The final speaker before we have Gurpreet Singh ji say the final words is Imtiaz Popert from Cooperating. Imtiaz.
It's not cooperating.
Not Cooperating anymore, that's right. CJSF.
CJSF, yeah. I promise not to take too long. Mubarak, Gurpreet, I was telling Charlie earlier that it took an immigrant from India to save our history and to preserve our history. Thank you to the Queen Sisters for your songs. Again, we have to remember that the history continues, right? Especially post 9/11, the anti-immigration security regime continues, and the work that we have done. So it's really important as journalists to tell our stories and to write. So again, thank you, Gurpreet, for preserving our history. Thank you.
Gurpreet ji, the final word belongs to you.
Naveen, thank you so much. You really did a wonderful job here. First of all, I want to thank each one of you for coming out and showing your support. I wish to thank Cecilia and her sister Mary for educating us about the indigenous struggles and such a wonderful song. That was very overwhelming and very emotional. Thank you so much. I also want to thank my mentor, Charlie, for all his moral support and encouragement and enlightening each one of us through his writings. He has been a great help for providing me a space to write about the Gadar history in his paper. I'm thankful to Kimball for editing my book and letting me write about the Gadar history in people's voice. I'm equally grateful to my employer and Radio India Managing Director Maninder Singh Gill for providing me an opportunity to talk about the Gadar history on the radio. This has greatly helped me in doing my research on this subject. I'm also grateful to Harinder Mahal for providing us such a wonderful perspective on the relevance of the Gadar history in the contemporary world. And we are all thankful to the descendants of the Gadar activists for coming out today and releasing the book. I also want to take a moment to thank Naveen Giran, our MC. He has done a wonderful job. You have seen that. I would like to take a moment to let everyone know here that this guy is working hard to make an otherwise obscured South Asian history visible through his research. He was instrumental in identifying the spot where the first Sikh temple of Vancouver once stood. It was, after all, a nerve center of the Gadar activities. Due to his efforts, a plaque is now installed there with a brief history of the temple. If the community really wants, Naveen can also help us in identifying the place where Mewa Singh was actually hanged and get a similar marker installed. I'm also thankful to Jeffrey Kaufman, my guide with the Social History Department of UBC, for encouraging me to write a paper on Mewa Singh. This was the only time when UBC was kind to me. Otherwise, otherwise they won't have me for the School of Journalism. Also, I want to thank Mr. Surinder Sangha of the Indo-Canadian Workers Association. He has really inspired in me the interest for the Ghadar Party. And also prominent historian Hugh Johnston, a renowned author Sadhu Bining, the former president of the Khalsa Diwan Society Kashmir Singh Taliwal, and my father-in-law Dr. Raghbir Singh, who is an authority on the Ghadar history, for helping me in completing my paper. Mr. Raghbir Singh is here. So my father-in-law is also my teacher. I want to thank as well Satish Gulati of Chetna Prakashan for publishing this book, and Jarnail Singh, a prominent painter of our community, for letting us use Mewa Singh's portrait made by him on the cover. We also need to recognize here that Professor Gurvinder Singh Taliwal was the first radio broadcaster in our community to introduce the practice of holding a moment of silence for Mewa Singh on his martyrdom day. And we also thank Sohan Puni, another authority on the Ghadar history, for introducing this idea. Last but not least, I want to thank my media colleagues for helping spread the message about my book. They include Jane Boy of Co-op Radio, Kamaljeet Thind of Mehak Punjabi, Gurdeep Garewal of Hamdard, Rupinder Hare of the Indo-Canadian Times, Sunil Narula of the Indo-Canadian Voice, Umindra Singh of the Asian Star, and all my co-workers at Radio India. And I can see in the crowd some of the elected officials who are here, and we welcome them. Among them was Ginny Sims, you just heard her, and Raj Chauhan, Harry Baines, Bruce Ralston, and former MLA Jagru Brad. And I can also see WSO President Mr. Prem Singh Winning. He has also shown up. Thank you, Mr. Winning. Now I want to talk about why we need to remember our history. It's important to remember it because we have a long way to go before the dreams of the Ghadar Party come true. Here I would like to briefly share a real story. Today is a very black day or sad day in our people's history. On the intervening night of July 27, 28, 1970, Comrade Bhuja Singh, a former Ghadar activist, was killed by the police of independent India. The person who deserved state honor for participating in the struggle to rid India of British occupation instead got a police bullet from his compatriots. His fault was that he had joined an ultra-leftist Naxalite movement, an uprising of the landless tillers, indigenous peoples, and poor, who revolted against the rich and elite in 1960s. Bhuja Singh was instrumental in establishing a chapter of the Ghadar Party in Argentina. The Ghadar Party was first established in North America in 1913 by the Indian immigrants. These men came to US and Canada for better livelihood as British subjects, as India was under British occupation back then. Many of them actually believed in the fairness of the British Empire and had served for the British Army. They were disillusioned when the British government refused to come to their aid whenever there was a racial violence against the East Indians. It soon dawned upon them that the root cause of their sufferings was slavery back home. These ugly experiences transformed them into freedom fighters and social justice activists. And that's how the Ghadar Party came into being, and gradually it spread its wings among the Indian diaspora throughout the world. Eventually, many of these activists returned to India to pursue for freedom of the homeland from foreign occupation. Many of these men faced gallows or life imprisonments, while those who survived continued struggle for social justice even after India formally gained independence in 1947, and Bhuja Singh was one of them. But he was not alone to have suffered the tyranny of the establishment. Others like Sohan Singh Bhakna, the founder of the Ghadar Party, was thrown into jail during an independent India for raising his voice against the exploitation of the working class and poor. Gurmukh Singh Lalton, who was aboard the Khamagata ship, which was forced to return by the Canadian government under the racist immigration law, articulated about this pain on the 50th anniversary of the Ghadar Party. Likewise, former Ghadar activist Mangu Ram Muggawal had continued his struggle against untouchability and caste-based oppression in post-independent India. A Dalit himself, he endured this oppression and lived with this pain as a child in India before migrating to US, where he became an active member of the Ghadar Party. He was pained to find that this oppression continued against Dalits even upon his return to India after spending several years in exile. He therefore decided to quit the Ghadar party to launch a Dalit emancipation movement in Punjab. From my perspective, all these stories, including that of Mewa Singh, need to be situated in a broader context of the history of colonialism, occupation, racism, and immigration. The challenges that face Mewa Singh and others are very much alive even today. Mewa Singh may not have been forced to assassinate Hopkinson had the Canadian government been fair in treating East Indian immigrants. Even the Sun headline described Hopkinson as the victim of the Kamagata Maru episode that added a black chapter in the history of Canada. His own testimony reveals how racism and harassment by the immigration officials fueled his anger against Hopkinson and his spies within the South Asian community. Now let us make no mistakes. We don't live in a perfect world. Neither Canada is heaven, nor is India's so-called development and progress inclusive. The struggle for the marginalized and the poor, for whom the Ghadar activists fought throughout their lives, still continues both in India and Canada. Dalits, or the so-called untouchables, and the Adivasis, or the indigenous peoples of India, continue to suffer. They have been completely marginalized in the process of uneven development. The Dalits are forced to indulge in manual scavenging, while the displacement of Adivasis in the name of development continues shamelessly. The indigenous peoples of Canada too continue to be victimized and oppressed. The immigration policies remain discriminatory against non-Europeans in this country. Racism is still an ugly reality in this country despite claims of diversity and multiculturalism. All these factors contributed to the birth of the Ghadar party 100 years ago. 100 years later, these challenges continue to prevail, and there is a need to keep activism of the Ghadar heroes going. Regionalism, religious sectarianism, and sexism continue to pose threat to people's unity. The Ghadar activists were opposed to all forces inimical to people's unity and brotherhood. They opposed all forms of prejudices, and many of them, like Bhuja Singh and Sohan Singh Bakna, risked their lives by trying to protect the Muslims during religious violence that followed the division of India and Pakistan on communal lines. They challenged the Hindu and Sikh fanatics on the Indian side of the border. Yet those promoting religious fanaticism and support theocracy are today trying to appropriate the Ghadar history for their narrow and selfish interests. If the political leadership of India was sincere and really cared for the values of the Ghadar party, there wouldn't have been a religious partition of India in the first place. Post-independent India too has witnessed worse religious pogroms, often instigated and engineered by the political parties and the governments. All this reflects very badly on India's secular democracy. It is pertinent to mention that the Ghadar activists also stood for gender equality. People like Bhakna opened schools for girls in an orthodox Indian society and tried to educate women. Now, as was pointed out earlier, heteropatriarchy was actually introduced by the colonists in Canada. And as Cecilia was saying, the women used to make decisions before the colonists stepped their foot on the Canadian soil. And that's why we are seeing systemic sexual violence against indigenous women in this country. Now they also denounce caste system, ritualism, and all age-old regressive traditions and prove themselves to be ahead of time. The stories I have told you clearly belie claims that the Ghadar party had failed in its mission. This may be technically and pragmatically true, as the Ghadar party did not receive mass support when its members returned to India to stage a coup with the help of masses and Indian soldiers. However, from a social justice perspective, Ghadar movement was not only politically progressive, but a continuous struggle for a just society that still goes on both in India and elsewhere. The freedom of India from the British occupation is one thing, but liberation from socio-economic inequality is still a far cry. The yawning gap between the rich and the poor and the ongoing exploitation of the indigenous peoples and Dalits in India still pose a challenge to the society that needs to focus on unfinished task of the Ghadar heroes instead of holding symbolic and tokenistic celebrations. We must also stand up against racism, religious intolerance, caste-based oppression, and violence against women. While in Canada, the minimum we can do is to stand up for the indigenous peoples of this country and support grassroots level movements like Idle No More. Thank you so much. I would like to I would like to say a few words in my mother tongue for my compatriots. ਦੋਸਤੋ ਇਹੀ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਸੰਖੇਪ 'ਚ ਦੁਹਰਾਉਣੀ ਚਾਹਾਂਗਾ। ਅੱਜ ਦਾ ਦਿਨ ਬੜਾ ਹੀ ਉਦਾਸ ਤੇ ਕਾਲਾ ਦਿਨ ਹੈ। 27-28 ਜੁਲਾਈ 1970 ਦੀ ਦਰਮਿਆਨੀ ਰਾਤ ਨੂੰ ਬੂਜਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੂੰ ਪੁਲਿਸ ਨੇ ਝੂਠੇ ਮੁਕਾਬਲੇ 'ਚ ਖਪਾ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਸੀ। ਕਸੂਰ ਕੀ ਸੀ ਬੂਜਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਦਾ? ਉਹ ਨਕਸਲੀ ਲਹਿਰ ਦੇ ਕਾਰਕੁਨ ਸੀ। ਪਰ ਇਹ ਨਾ ਭੁੱਲੋ ਕਿ ਕਿਸੇ ਵੇਲੇ ਗਦਰ ਪਾਰਟੀ 'ਚ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਯੋਗਦਾਨ ਪਾਇਆ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਕੁਰਬਾਨੀ ਇਸ ਗੱਲ ਦਾ ਪ੍ਰਤੀਕ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਗਦਰੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਣੀ ਲੜਾਈ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇੱਕ ਚੰਗੇ ਸਮਾਜ ਦੇ ਲਈ, ਬਿਹਤਰ ਸਮਾਜ ਲਈ ਆਜ਼ਾਦ ਹਿੰਦੁਸਤਾਨ 'ਚ ਵੀ ਜਾਰੀ ਰੱਖੀ ਹੈ। ਸਾਡੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬੀਬੀ ਹਰਜੀਤ ਢਿੱਲੋਂ, ਮਨਜੀਤ ਢਿੱਲੋਂ ਜੀ ਬੈਠੇ ਨੇ। ਮੈਂ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਗਲਤ ਨਾ ਹੋਵਾਂ, ਮਨਜੀਤ ਢਿੱਲੋਂ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਬਾਬਾ ਜੀ ਨਰਿੰਦਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਪਡੋਰੀ ਦਾ ਇੱਕ ਬਿਆਨ ਪੜ੍ਹਿਆ ਜਿਸ ਤੋਂ ਇਸ ਗੱਲ ਦਾ ਅਨੁਮਾਨ ਲਾਇਆ ਜਾ ਸਕਦਾ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਸਿਸਟਮ ਦੇ ਖਿਲਾਫ ਲੜਾਈ ਜਾਰੀ ਰੱਖੀ। ਆਜ਼ਾਦ ਹਿੰਦੁਸਤਾਨ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉਹ ਤ੍ਰਿਪਤੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਹੋਈ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਸੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆਜ਼ਾਦੀ ਮਿਲੀ ਹੈ ਇਹ ਉਸ ਰੂਪ 'ਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਮਿਲੀ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੀ ਮਿਲਣੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਸੀ, ਜਿਹਦਾ ਨਤੀਜਾ ਇਹ ਨਿਕਲਿਆ ਕਿ ਅੱਜ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੇਖ ਲਓ ਦਲਿਤਾਂ ਨਾਲ, ਆਦੀਵਾਸੀਆਂ ਨਾਲ ਲੁੱਟ ਖਸੁੱਟ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ, ਔਰਤਾਂ ਦਾ ਸ਼ੋਸ਼ਣ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ। ਗਦਰੀ ਆਪਣੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਤੋਂ ਅੱਗੇ ਦੀ ਸੋਚਦੇ ਸੀ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸੋਚ ਬੜੀ ਵਿਸ਼ਾਲ ਤੇ ਬੜੀ ਅੱਗੇ ਵਧੂ ਸੀ। ਉਹ ਸੋਚ ਨੂੰ ਵਿਸਾਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਗਿਆ। ਇਸੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਇਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਦਿਨ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਵੇਖਣੇ ਪੈ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ। ਹੁਣ ਹਿੰਦੁਸਤਾਨ ਦੀ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਜਾਂ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਕਲ ਪਾਰਟੀਆਂ ਗਦਰ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦੇ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਨੂੰ ਤੋੜ ਮਰੋੜ ਕੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਹੱਕ 'ਚ ਤਾਂ ਇਸਤੇਮਾਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੀਆਂ, ਪਰ ਇਸ ਗਦਰ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮਿਸ਼ਨ ਨੂੰ ਲਾਗੂ ਕਰਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਫੇਲ ਹੋਈਆਂ। ਉਸ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪ ਜਾਗੀਏ। ਜੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਸੋਚੀਏ ਕਿ ਸਿਆਸੀ ਲੀਡਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਕੋਈ ਤਬਦੀਲੀ ਕਰ ਦੇਣਗੇ, ਇਹ ਸਾਡਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡਾ ਭੁਲੇਖਾ। ਔਰ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਸਿਰਫ ਹਿੰਦੁਸਤਾਨ ਦੇ ਲਾਗੂ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦੀ, ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਵੀ ਲਾਗੂ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ। ਗਦਰ ਦਾ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦਾ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਸੀ। ਕੈਨੇਡਾ 'ਚ ਨਸਲਵਾਦ ਹੋਇਆ, ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਗਦਰ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਹੋਣ 'ਚ ਆਈ। ਨਸਲਵਾਦ ਅੱਜ ਵੀ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ, ਸਾਡੇ ਮੂਲ ਨਿਵਾਸੀ ਦੋਸਤਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ। ਔਰਤਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਥੇ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਲਿੰਗ ਹਮਲੇ ਹੋ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ, ਖਾਸ ਤੌਰ 'ਤੇ ਮੂਲ ਨਿਵਾਸੀ ਫਿਰਕੇ ਦੀਆਂ ਔਰਤਾਂ 'ਤੇ, ਇਹ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਸਮਝਣ ਵਾਲਾ। ਔਰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਲੁੱਟ ਖਸੁੱਟ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ, ਧਰਤੀ 'ਤੇ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਕਬਜ਼ਾ ਕਰਨਾ, ਕੁਦਰਤੀ ਸੋਮਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਲੁੱਟ ਖਸੁੱਟ ਕਰਨੀ ਔਰ ਆਦੀਵਾਸੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਬੇਦਖਲ ਕਰਨਾ, ਇਹ ਸਾਰਾ ਸਿਲਸਿਲਾ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ 'ਚ ਵੀ ਉਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਹੀ ਜਾਰੀ ਹੈ। ਔਰ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਟੌਤੀਆਂ ਹੋ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਨੇ, ਸਰਕਾਰ ਨੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਸੁਪਰ ਵੀਜ਼ੇ ਦਾ ਮਾਫੀਆ ਦਾ ਛੂਛਣਾ ਦੇਤਾ ਔਰ ਸਾਡੇ ਕਈ ਭਾਈਚਾਰੇ ਦੇ ਲੋਕ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਖੇਡ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ, ਜਦੋਂ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਅਰਥ ਨਹੀਂ। ਮਾਫੀ ਤਾਂ ਹਾਰਪਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਸ਼ੀਅਲ ਸਕੂਲਾਂ ਲਈ ਵੀ ਮੰਗੀ ਸੀ ਮੂਲ ਨਿਵਾਸੀਆਂ ਤੋਂ, ਪਰ ਬਾਅਦ 'ਚ G7 G20 ਦੇ ਸੰਮੇਲਨ 'ਚ ਕਹਿਤਾ ਕਿ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ 'ਚ ਤਾਂ ਬਸਤੀਵਾਦ ਹੋਇਆ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ। ਸੋ ਉਸ ਮਾਫੀ ਦਾ ਕੀ ਅਰਥ ਹੋਇਆ? ਇਸੇ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਕਾਮਾਗਾਟਾ ਮਾਰੂ ਕਾਂਡ ਲਈ ਮਾਫੀ ਚਾਹੇ ਪਾਰ 'ਚ ਮੰਗੀ, ਕੋਈ ਇਸ ਨੂੰ ਮੰਨੇ ਨਾ ਮੰਨੇ, ਮਾਫੀ ਹੈ, ਪਰ ਉਸ ਮਾਫੀ ਦਾ ਸਾਡੇ ਲਈ ਕੋਈ ਅਰਥ ਨਹੀਂ। ਜੇ ਅੱਜ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਬਜ਼ੁਰਗਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਥੇ ਆਉਣ ਦੇ ਰਹੇ ਤੇ ਕੀ ਇਹਦੇ ਲਈ 100 ਸਾਲ ਬਾਅਦ ਫਿਰ ਮਾਫੀ ਮੰਗੀ ਜਾਵੇਗੀ? ਸੋ ਇਹ ਮਾਫੀਆਂ ਦੀ ਸਿਆਸਤ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ ਇਹਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਮਾਇਨਾ ਨਹੀਂ। ਨਸਲਵਾਦ ਅੱਜ ਵੀ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ, ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਰਗੜੇ ਵੱਜ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ, ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਾਗਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ। ਗਦਰ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦੀ ਸੋਚ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਪੈਰਾ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ। ਸਿਰਫ ਇੰਨੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੀ ਸਿੱਖ ਲਵੋ ਦੋਸਤੋ, ਬਥੇਰੀ ਹੈ। ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਜਦੋਂ ਵੀ ਲੋੜ ਪਵੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਖੜੋ, ਜੋਕਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਨਾ ਖੜੇ ਹੋਵੋ। ਬਹੁਤ ਬਹੁਤ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ।
Thank you so much, Gurpreet ji, for those wonderful words, and thank you everyone for attending this afternoon. The books are available on the side here, and Gurpreet ji, I don't think will mind signing books as well too, if necessary. Thank you so much. And if you haven't seen it yet, Janelle Singh ji's exhibition on the Kamagadamu paintings is just in the far room. Thank you so much, everyone.
Gurpreet, can I ask you one question? There's a list. I can show you. Well, I know the first three. The first two and the last one. The two. No, I know.